The first time Lady Cecily Marlowe looked at Seraphina's wedding ring, she smiled as though she had already watched it leave her hand. London, 1868, had taught the Duchess of Whit-more many things, but none so useful as the art of appearing untouched, while another woman sharpened a knife beneath silk gloves. By 7 o'clock, evening Whitmore House in Mayfair glowed from cellar to cornice, with lamplight polished silver, and the sort of costly order that made guests believe a great house governed itself. It did not. Seraphina had spent the entire afternoon correcting what no guest would ever notice unless it went wrong. The lilies in the entrance hall had been moved because their scent would trouble Lady Marcham's breathing. The place cards had been changed twice because an earl's widow must not be seated below a baron's new wife, however rich the baron might be. The second footman had been told to carry the soup from the left, not the right, because Lord Pembury disliked being approached near his injured shoulder and would turn the irritation into a public story by midnight. The candles in the dining room were trimmed to the same height. The wineglasses stood in clear ranks. The housekeeper had been reassured. The cook had been praised. A scullery maid who had broken a saucer had been sent bread and tea instead of a reprimand, because fear made hands clumsy, and Seraphina had long ago learned that a house ran better on dignity than terror. At 7:30, she stood before the tall mirror in the blue withdrawing room and fastened the last pearl at her throat. She wore pale silver silk, chosen not because it pleased her, but because it did not invite comment. Her dark hair was arranged simply. Her expression was composed. Only the ring betrayed her, a narrow band of gold and family diamonds on the third finger of her left hand. It caught the lamplight whenever she moved, announcing to the room what the room always seemed determined to forget. She was not a guest. She was not a useful relation. She was the Duchess of Whit-more. She had been so for 4 years. A soft knock came Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, entered with the grave face of a woman bearing news that had already travelled below stairs. "His Grace has arrived, Your Grace." Seraphina did not turn too quickly. She had trained herself out of that weakness during the first year of marriage, when every sound of wheels in the courtyard had once made hope rise in her, like an undignified girl. "Thank you, Mrs. Vale. Is His Grace in the library?" "No, Your Grace. He has gone directly to dress." Of course he had. Adrian St. Ormond, Duke of Whit-more, could return from Helmsley Park, after nearly 3 months away, and still obey every rule of a household while breaking the only one that mattered. He would dress. He would descend. He would stand beside her long enough for the guests to see that the marriage remained intact. Then he would spend the evening speaking to everyone in the room with more attention than he gave his wife. "Very well," Seraphina said. "Please tell Mr. Havers to delay the first course by 8 minutes. Lord and Lady Elmsworth are never late enough to insult, only late enough to be noticed, Mrs. Vale's face softened with something like sorrow, but she knew better than to offer it. "Yes, Your Grace." When the door closed, Seraphina looked once more at the ring. She did not touch it. Touching it had become dangerous. It made her remember the morning of her wedding, when she had stood in a quiet chapel with Adrian beside her, his face pale with a grief he had never explained. She had not expected love. She had been raised too carefully for such foolishness. Her father had told her the match would save the vain name from debt and place her where her intelligence might matter. Adrian had said little, but when he slid the ring onto her finger, his hand had trembled once. She had believed that tremor meant there was a human heart beneath the title. Later she learned there were tremors of anger as well as tenderness. The guests began to arrive in a perfume of damp wool, carriage air, and expensive flowers. Seraphina received them at the entrance to the drawing room with a calm smile and the exact degree of warmth each rank required. She knew who preferred to be called dear, and who considered dear an insult. She knew which dowager was deaf in her left ear, and which young wife dreaded being asked about children. She knew that Lord Pembury's compliments always came with a hook. "Your Grace," he said, bowing over her hand just a little longer than necessary. Whit-more House is as ever a triumph of quiet usefulness. The word fell lightly, it was meant to. Quiet usefulness was what one praised in a well-trained horse, a widowed aunt, or a piece of furniture that never demanded repair. Seraphina smiled. "How kind of you to notice anything quiet, my lord. Most men in London admire only what makes noise." A ripple passed through the nearest guests. Lord Pembury's mouth tightened, but before he could answer, the room shifted. Not loudly. Great rooms rarely announced power with sound. They made space for it. Adrian had entered. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed in black evening clothes that made every other gentleman look slightly overdressed or slightly unfinished. His face had the controlled beauty of a portrait restored too carefully, all clean lines and guarded shadows. There were men with older titles and men with larger fortunes, but in that room none stood higher than a duke, who did not need to raise his voice. He crossed toward Seraphina with perfect courtesy. "Your Grace," not Seraphina, never when others could hear. "Your Grace," she replied, and dipped her head. His eyes moved over her face, her pearls, her gloved hands, and then stopped for the smallest instant on the ring. Something passed behind his expression. It was gone before any guest could have named it. "Everything appears in excellent order," he said. "You are generous to say so. I am accurate." The words should have pleased her. Instead, they landed like praise given to a steward. She turned to greet the next arrival, because a duchess who paused over pain invited witnesses. Then Lady Cecily Marlowe was announced. Seraphina did not need to look at Adrian to feel the room measure his stillness. Cecily entered in rose-colored silk, with pale hair arranged in a softness that suggested innocence, and cost a maid at least an hour. She was not the most beautiful woman in London, but she was one of the cleverest at appearing as though beauty had never occurred to her. Her father had left debts. Her mother's connections had thinned. Yet she moved through society with the assurance of a woman who had once been promised a future grand enough to make every present disappointment temporary. "Your Grace," Cecily said to Adrian, lowering her lashes, "how glad London must be to have you returned." Then she turned to Seraphina with a smile as smooth as cream, "And Your Grace. You have made the house exquisite, as always. You are very kind, Lady Cecily." "Not kind, observant." Cecily's gaze dropped to Seraphina's hand. The ring flashed. "How steadfast some things are. Gold usually is," Seraphina said. "How comforting," Cecily murmured. "Though I have always thought some rings are only promises men regret making." The words were soft enough to be mistaken for melancholy by anyone who wished not to hear cruelty. Seraphina heard it. Adrian heard it too, his eyes sharpened. "Lady Cecily," he said, "my wife has not invited a discussion of regret." Cecily looked wounded at once, which was one of her more polished talents. "I meant no offense. You know I speak too plainly when I feel too much." "Then feel less publicly," Adrian said. It should have been a defense. It was one in form. Yet he spoke as a duke correcting a breach of manners, not as a husband guarding a hurt. The distinction was invisible to the guests. It was not invisible to Seraphina. Dinner followed with all the elegance of a campaign. Seraphina sat at one end of the long table, Adrian at the other, separated by silver, flowers, crystal, and 4 years of things neither had said. Cecily sat near enough to Adrian to be seen when he turned his head. The guests noticed. They always did. Lady Marcham asked Cecily about her music. Lord Elmsworth asked whether she had been to Helmsley Park in former years. Someone remembered a summer party before Adrian's marriage and laughed too brightly. The story formed itself in the spaces between courses. Cecily was the woman of feeling, the woman of memory, the woman who belonged to the Duke's past. Seraphina was the present arrangement, who knew when to signal for the fish to be removed. She ate almost nothing. It was not deliberate. Her throat had narrowed after Cecily's remark, and each bite tasted of candle smoke and restraint. Across the table, Adrian's gaze returned to her plate once, then again. His hand moved toward the small bell near his wineglass, the one that would summon a servant to bring something different if the Duchess were unwell. Halfway there, he stopped. Seraphina saw the movement, so did Cecily. A faint satisfaction touched Cecily's mouth, as though she had watched a door remain closed. Lord Pembury lifted his glass. "We must congratulate His Grace on possessing a duchess so admirably suited to the invisible arts of comfort. Some ladies demand attention. Others improve a house by not disturbing it." Silence gathered under the chandelier. Seraphina felt every eye turn, some pitying, some eager. Before she could answer, Adrian set down his knife. The sound was quiet, but it cut cleanly through the room. "My lord, Whit-more House is not improved by discourtesy disguised as wit." Lord Pembury flushed. "I intended only praise. Then you have discovered that intention is no substitute for skill." A few guests lowered their eyes. Cecily's fingers tightened around her glass. Seraphina kept her face still, because gratitude was almost as dangerous as hope. Adrian had defended the Duchess's dignity, not Seraphina's heart. Still, the room had felt the weight of his rank fall on her side of the table, and for one brief moment, no one dared call her invisible. The final course arrived. Conversation resumed, thinner than before. Seraphina presided with the same calm she had brought to the candles, the seating, the broken saucer below stairs, and the 1,000 small fractures of her marriage. When the ladies withdrew, Cecily lingered a moment beside her chair. Her voice was soft enough for only Seraphina, and perhaps Adrian, still standing at the far end, to hear. "You are very composed, Your Grace. I have always admired women who can live without asking whether they are wanted." Seraphina met her eyes. "And I have always admired women who know the difference between being remembered and being chosen." Cecily's smile faltered. Then she lifted her glass, turned slightly toward the room, and let her voice rise with graceful sorrow. "Tell me, Your Grace, is freedom ever kinder than a loveless marriage?" For one suspended second, no one breathed, as if Lady Cecily Marlowe had asked a harmless question. The drawing-room at Whit-more House remained arranged for politeness, with ladies gathered near the fire, gentlemen drifting in from the dining-room, and silver coffee cups waiting on a side table. Yet the air had changed. Seraphina felt it move across her skin like a draught beneath a closed door. Freedom, loveless marriage. The words were not loud, but they had been shaped for witnesses. Lady Marcham lowered her gaze to the carpet. Lord Pembury looked delighted behind his glass. Adrian stood at the threshold, between the dining-room and the drawing-room. One hand still resting against the carved door-frame, his expression unreadable, except for the small hardening at his jaw. Seraphina could have laughed softly and turned the sentence aside. A duchess was expected to do that. She could have said marriage was a sacred duty, or freedom was a dangerous modern word, or Lady Cecily was too romantic after music and wine. Instead, she looked down at her own hand. The ring shone beneath the lamps, calm and bright, as though gold knew nothing of humiliation. "That depends," Seraphina said. Her voice did not tremble. "Upon whether the marriage contains honor." Cecily tilted her head. "And if it doesn't?" Several women looked away. They knew they should not listen. They listened with all their hearts. Adrian moved at last, crossing the room with a controlled stride that made the space around him open. "Lady Cecily mistaken my house for a confessional." Cecily's lashes lifted with wounded grace. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. I didn't know honest questions were forbidden here. Cruel ones are." The correction was quiet. It should have ended the matter. In another house, with another woman, perhaps it would have. Cecily only turned her eyes to Seraphina. "I meant no cruelty. I only wondered whether a woman should remain where she's not cherished." There it was, not accusation, not insult. Pity. Pity was the most elegant blade society owned, because the person holding it could always claim tenderness. Seraphina felt her face become very still. She had endured cool breakfasts, separate carriages, unanswered letters, and the particular loneliness of walking beside a husband whose sleeve never brushed hers unless servants were watching. Yet pity made something inside her stand upright. Adrian looked at her then, truly looked, perhaps because she had not looked at him. "Seraphina," he said, and the sound of her name from his mouth startled the room more than a shout would have done. She turned to him. "Does Lady Cecily ask what you have not wished to say?" The silence deepened. Adrian's eyes darkened. "This is neither the time nor place. It became both when your guest made my marriage a subject for entertainment." Cecily inhaled softly. Lord Pembury's brows rose, hungry for scandal. Seraphina knew she had crossed a line that no well-bred wife crossed in public. A wife might suffer. She might withdraw. She might grow pale over her embroidery and be praised for delicacy. She must not ask a duke to account for the emptiness of his own household while guests stood within 10 feet. But years of restraint had gathered inside her, not as hysteria, not as tears, but as a clarity so clean it frightened her. "Tell me plainly," she said. "Do you wish me to remain here?" Adrian's hand closed once at his side. "You are the Duchess of Whit-more. That is not an answer. It's the only answer this room requires." "No." The word left her before caution could stop it. A few guests shifted. Cecily went utterly still. Seraphina heard the faint rattle of a coffee spoon against china. "No," she repeated softer. "It is the answer the room requires." "It is not the answer I require." Adrian looked at her as if she had stepped out of a portrait and become flesh without his permission. "You are tired," he said. "We will speak in the morning, we will not." His gaze sharpened. "Seraphina, don't say my name as though it can command me back into silence." The words shocked even her. They were not loud. They were worse. They were true. Cecily's mouth parted, but no sound came. Lord Pembury almost smiled. Adrian saw that smile. Something dangerous passed over his face and vanished beneath rank. "Everyone will retire," he said. Now, no one moved. Society loved obedience, but it loved disaster more. Seraphina kept her eyes on him. "You may dismiss guests from your room, Your Grace." "You may not dismiss the question." Adrian's expression closed. Not coldness now. Defense. Pride. The old locked gate she had spent 4 years standing before with empty hands. "What would you have me say?" he asked. "The truth." His mouth tightened as if the word had struck him. "Truth is seldom kind in a room full of strangers." Then perhaps it should have been offered before strangers were needed. A faint color rose along his cheekbones. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a duke than a man caught between anger and something he did not dare name. Seraphina saw the wound beneath his pride, and even then, even in that cruel room, part of her wanted to spare him. That old habit nearly ruined her. Then Cecily spoke, silk soft. "Perhaps Her Grace only wants permission to stop pretending." Adrian turned his head towards Cecily. "Enough. I'm only saying what everyone can see. If she wishes to leave, why should she be made to stay?" The room waited. It was obscene, that waiting. Seraphina felt each gaze settle on her like a hand. Adrian looked back at his wife. He was pale now, but his voice, when it came, was controlled with the old lethal precision. "If freedom is what you require," he said, "you may have it." Seraphina felt the words enter her body slowly, not like a blow, but like winter water rising around her ankles. Meaning? His eyes flickered. He had gone too far, he knew it. Yet pride had never been a horse he could rein quickly. "You can leave." The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It became reverent. Seraphina looked at the man she had married, the man whose house she had kept, whose servants she had protected, whose grief she had never mocked, whose silence she had mistaken. For pain she might someday understand. Her own pain became suddenly simple. It did not need explanation. It needed an ending. She drew off her glove finger by finger. The small sounds of kid leather moving against skin seemed impossibly loud. Adrian's eyes dropped to her hand. "Seraphina, don't." The contraction made the plea human. It came too late. She took the wedding ring between the thumb and forefinger of her right hand. For 4 years, it had resisted every change in her body, every season, every loneliness. Now it slid free with terrible ease. She placed it on the polished table beside her untouched wine glass. Gold met wood with a sound so slight that the room had to be silent to hear it. "I entered this marriage with honor," she said. "I will leave it with the same." Cecily's face altered. Triumph came first, then confusion, because Seraphina had not broken in the expected way. There were no tears to drink, no plea to repeat later in delighted whispers, no shaking hands. Seraphina turned toward the door. Lady Marcham made a small, helpless movement, as if to stop her, and thought better of it. Adrian moved then, fast enough that the nearest guests drew back. His hand reached for the ring, or for her, or for the life he had just heard crack open. His fingers closed instead around the crystal wineglass beside it. The glass shattered in his bare hand, with a sharp sound that made every face in the room turn white. Seraphina stopped, but she did not turn fully. Adrian stood motionless, the broken stem caught in his palm, a thin red line marking the edge of his skin. He did not seem to feel it. His eyes were fixed on the ring. "Your Grace," Lord Pembury began. Adrian lifted his gaze. The room seemed to shrink beneath it. "No one follows the Duchess," he said. His voice was low. It carried everywhere. "No one speaks of her departure with anything less than respect. Any person who fails to understand me will no longer be received in this house." Cecily's color faded. "Adrian, I didn't mean. You will address me as Your Grace." She recoiled as if the correction had been public exile. Seraphina heard it, and still she continued toward the door. At the threshold she paused only long enough to speak to Mrs. Vale, who stood pale and rigid near the hall. "My cloak, please. And send word to Lady Honoria Vane in Bath that I shall arrive tomorrow." "Yes, Your Grace," the housekeeper whispered. Behind Seraphina, no one moved until her footsteps had faded beyond the marble hall. Only then did Adrian open his hand. A servant came forward with a linen cloth, but he ignored it. He picked up the ring with care so delicate it looked almost like fear. The gold was warm from her skin. He turned it beneath the lamplight, and for the first time since the day he had placed it on her finger, he noticed the narrow inner band. There were words engraved there, small words, faithful words, words he had never troubled himself to read. The words inside the ring were so small that Adrian had to tilt the gold toward the nearest lamp before they surrendered themselves to him. "With honor, if not with love." For several seconds, the drawing room did not exist. Neither did the broken crystal being swept from the floor, the anxious footman with the linen cloth, the guests stranded in a silence they did not know how to leave, or Lady Cecily Marlowe standing near the hearth, with all the color drained from her practiced face. There was only the ring, warm no longer, and the sentence his wife had carried on her hand for 4 years, without once asking him whether he knew it was there. With honor, if not with love. Adrian closed his fingers around the band, not tightly enough to bend it, but with an instinctive care that would have looked tender if tenderness had not come so late. He remembered the chapel. Not clearly at first. He had worked for years to remember that morning, only as a duty performed under pressure. The cold stone, the low voices. Seraphina standing beside him in ivory silk, calm as candlelight, her eyes lowered not in submission, but in self-command. He had been angry that day. Not at her, though he had let the anger settle where she stood, because she was nearest. And because Cecily had already left a wound in him, shaped exactly like humiliation. He had told himself that honor would be enough. He had not asked whether Seraphina had been telling herself the same thing. "Your Grace," Mr. Havers murmured from a respectful distance. "Your hand." Adrian looked down. A faint red line crossed his palm where the glass had cut the skin. It was not serious. It was almost absurd that everyone kept staring at it when his wife had just walked out of the house, carrying nothing but her name. "Bind it," he said. His voice came out flat. The butler stepped forward with the cloth. Cecily took one careful step toward him. "Adrian, please. I didn't think she would take it so. Do not finish that sentence." She stopped. Around them, the guests began remembering their bodies. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. Lady Marcham whispered for her wrap. Lord Pembury watched with a brightness that made Adrian want him out of the house before he found another word to poison. Adrian turned to Havers. "The carriages will be called. Every guest will be thanked for coming, and sent home. No refreshment, no lingering." "Yes, Your Grace." His eyes moved to Cecily. "Lady Cecily's carriage first." Cecily stared at him. "You can't mean to send me away as though I've done something vulgar." You made my wife a subject of public pity beneath my roof. I asked a question. You chose a weapon. Her lips parted, but he had already looked away. That was the cruelest correction he could offer her, and he knew it. Mrs. Vale, he said, as the housekeeper appeared at the door, pale but composed. No servant in this house is to repeat one syllable of what occurred tonight. If anyone asks after her grace, the answer is that she has gone to stay with her aunt in Bath. She travels with my knowledge and under my protection. Is that understood? Perfectly, your grace. And Lady Cecily is not to be admitted to the Duchess's sitting room, morning room, or apartments. Not tonight, not ever. Mrs. Vale lowered her head. Yes, your grace. Cecily drew herself up. You make me sound like an intruder. Adrian looked at her then, and some old blindness in him cracked enough to let in a blade of light. At last, we agree. By midnight, Whit-more House had emptied into a London fog thin enough to silver the lamps and thick enough to carry gossip. By morning, the story had already learned to walk on its own. It entered breakfast rooms before the tea. It climbed the steps of houses in Belgravia and Mayfair tucked between calling cards and condolences. It arrived dressed in sympathy, which made it more dangerous. The Duchess of Whit-more had fled. The Duke had crushed a glass in his hand. Lady Cecily Marlowe had been insulted. No, Lady Cecily Marlowe had been defending the poor Duchess. No, the poor Duchess had long been unhappy. No, not unhappy, guilty. By noon, the whispers had improved themselves into certainty. There had been money, there had been deception. There had been some old irregularity with the vain dowry that His Grace had finally discovered. A woman did not leave a duke's house in the middle of the night unless she feared what morning would reveal. Seraphina heard none of this until she reached Bath the following afternoon, though she felt its shadow long before the wheels stopped before Lady Honoria Vane's pale stone house on Great Pulteney Street. She had not slept. She had sat upright through the journey, watching hedgerows, inns, and wet fields pass like pieces of a life that no longer claimed her. She wore a plain travelling gown of dark blue wool. Her wedding finger felt lighter than it should have, and that lightness ached more sharply than any weight. She had refused the Whit-more travelling carriage beyond the first change of horses, and hired a modest one with her own pin money, to the distress of the groom Adrian had sent to attend the road. The groom had not argued. The servants of great houses knew when obedience must look like silence. Lady Honoria was waiting before the door had fully opened. She was a slender woman in her late 50s, with silver threaded through dark hair and eyes too intelligent for easy comfort. She took in Seraphina's face, the unadorned hand, the single trunk, and the absence of ducal splendor. Come inside, my dear, she said. We can decide later whether to mourn, rage, or take tea. Seraphina almost smiled. Almost. Tea, I think. Excellent. Rage is more effective after tea. The hall was narrow compared with Whit-more House, but it felt human. There were worn rugs, a blue vase with one chipped handle, and a fire that had been lit for warmth rather than display. In the small back parlour, Lady Honoria dismissed the maid and poured the tea herself. She did not ask why Seraphina had come without her ring. That mercy nearly undid what cruelty had not. I have written to no one, Seraphina said. Not even His Grace? Especially not His Grace. Lady Honoria handed her a cup. Did he strike you? Seraphina looked up at once. No, never. Good. Then we are spared one sort of ugliness, and left with the more fashionable kind. Seraphina's fingers tightened around the cup. He told me I could leave. Lady Honoria's expression changed, but only slightly. She had known enough sorrow to respect another person's composure. And so you did. Yes. Did you want him to stop you? The question was gentle. That made it worse. Seraphina looked toward the window, where the afternoon had gone the color of pewter. I wanted him to want to stop me before I had to ask. Lady Honoria made no sound. Silence settled between them, not empty but protective. After a moment, Seraphina opened the small reticule in her lap. I brought no jewels, nothing belonging to Whit-more, except the clothes I was wearing. The clothes belong to you. Do they? In this house they do. That was when Seraphina's composure slipped by the width of a breath. She set down the cup before it could betray her. Lady Honoria did not touch her. She only said, "You may stay as long as you wish. You may leave when you choose. Both are allowed here." Before Seraphina could answer, the parlour maid entered with a salver. "A letter for Lady Honoria, ma'am. It came by special messenger." Lady Honoria frowned at the seal. From Mr. Alden, Seraphina recognized the name. "My father's old solicitor, former clerk to him. He writes rarely and never for pleasure." Lady Honoria broke the seal. Her eyes moved down the page. The softness left her face. "What is it?" Seraphina asked. Lady Honoria read a line again, then reached into the escritoire beside her chair and withdrew an older folded paper tied with faded ribbon. "After your father died, a few of his papers came to me. I kept them because your mother had marked some in her hand. One was a letter supposedly written by your father shortly before your marriage." "Supposedly?" Lady Honoria untied the ribbon. "I did not like it then. I liked it less every year." She unfolded the page and placed it beside Mr. Alden's letter. "Look at the capital V in vain. Your father made it like a hook, always too sharp. This letter does not." Seraphina leaned closer. Her heart began to beat with a slow, hard rhythm. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old lavender. "What does the letter say?" "That your dowry settlement was incomplete. That certain sums promised to the Duke would be delayed. That if questions arose, you were to say nothing until after the wedding." Seraphina stared at her. "I never saw that letter." "I know." Lady Honoria's voice turned cold. "And your father did not write it." Outside, a carriage passed over the wet stones with a hollow rattle. Seraphina sat very still, feeling the shape of another trap beneath the ruin of the first. "Then someone wanted His Grace to believe I entered the marriage with a lie." Lady Honoria folded the forged letter with care, as though it were not paper but evidence of a hand reaching from the past. "Yes, my dear." Her gaze lifted to Seraphina's bare finger. "And if London is already whispering of money, then whoever forged this has not finished using it." By the following afternoon, Whitmore House had become the sort of place that polite London loved best. A silent house with a scandal locked inside it, and too many people pretending not to hear the lock turn. Adrian remained in the library long after breakfast had been removed untouched. His right hand was wrapped in clean linen, the injury small enough to be dismissed and visible enough to accuse him every time he moved. On the desk before him lay Seraphina's ring, a folded list of callers who had already sent cards, and 3 notes written in 3 different feminine hands, each expressing concern with the precise amount of curiosity that made concern useless. He had read none of them twice. He had read the engraving inside the ring until the words no longer seemed carved into gold, but into him. With honor, if not with love, he had given her neither. Not truly. He had given her a title, rooms, servants, carriages, jewels, and the cold civility society called respect when it had no wish to examine loneliness. He had permitted her to make his house as perfect while never asking what perfection cost. The thought had followed him through the night. It had stood beside him while the surgeon dressed his palm. It had watched him send instructions to the stables that the Duchess's journey to Bath was to be protected without being made conspicuous. It remained there now, seated across from him like a guest he had no power to dismiss. Havers entered with the stillness of a butler who knew the household was listening through keyholes no one would admit existed. "Lady Cecily Marlowe has called, Your Grace." Adrian did not look up at once. "I gave instructions." "Yes, Your Grace. Lady Cecily says she comes only from concern and will not remain if you are too indisposed. Concern has become fashionable very quickly." "So it appears, Your Grace." Adrian closed his hand around the ring, then opened it again because the gesture felt like possession. And possession was exactly the error he could no longer afford. "Show her into the morning room. Not the blue withdrawing room. Not Her Grace's sitting room." Havers bowed. Of course, the morning room was Seraphina's least favorite room, which made it the safest. She had once said, in that careful way of hers, that its yellow silk walls tried too hard to be cheerful. Adrian had not answered her then. He remembered that now, with an irritation directed entirely at himself. Cecily was standing by the window when he entered, dressed in soft green with a bonnet tied beneath her chin, as if she had come from church rather than conquest. She turned at once, and her eyes moved to the bandage on his hand before rising to his face. "Adrian," he stopped near the door. "Your Grace." Colour touched her cheeks. "Of course. Forgive me. Last night unsettled me. It unsettled many people. It must have unsettled you most of all." She took a step toward him, then halted when he did not move to meet her. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of Seraphina leaving like that. It was terrible. I never wanted her to be hurt." The name sounded wrong in her mouth, too intimate, too smooth. "My wife," he said, "was not hurt by leaving. She was hurt before it." Cecily's gaze sharpened, but she softened it quickly. "You blame me. I have not yet decided how much. That's unjust. Perhaps I have practiced injustice longer than I knew." She looked at him as though he had spoken in a language she disliked. Then she lowered her lashes. "Everyone is saying she left because of the old settlement rumors. I told Lady Marcham it couldn't be true, naturally. I said, no woman of breeding would enter a marriage knowing her family had deceived her husband." Adrian became very still. "What old settlement rumors?" Cecily's lips parted. It was only an instant, but he saw it. She had expected him to know the shape of the poison, not question the cup. "Oh, nothing's certain," she said lightly. "You know how London is. A word here, a memory there. Something about Lord Vane's affairs being more distressed than admitted." Lord Vane's affairs were distressed. That was public enough. "Yes, but the dowry was said to be—" She paused. "Delayed, perhaps." The word landed with unnatural precision. Delayed, not insufficient, not ruined, delayed. A word from correspondence, not gossip. Adrian crossed to the mantel, not because he wanted distance from her, but because if he stayed near the door, she might mistake stillness for ignorance. "Who said that?" "I don't remember. Does it matter?" "It matters if the word comes from someone with access to documents." Cecily laughed softly. "You're making this sound like chancery. Surely you don't mean to drag your own marriage through clerks and solicitors because Seraphina chose to make a scene." "She did not make a scene. She removed her ring in front of half your circle. After I gave her reason." Cecily's expression changed again, grief becoming impatience before she caught it and turned it into wounded affection. "You were angry. Any man would have been. She challenged you before guests. A duchess should know better." The sentence carried him backward, not to the night before, but to another room, another season, another version of himself. Cecily at 19, all brightness and promise, standing beneath a painted ceiling at Lord Fenwick's ball, while he believed the world had arranged itself into certainty. She had taken his arm then, as though it belonged to her future. She had let him speak of Helmsley Park, of duties, of the music room his mother had loved, of the life he imagined might be stern but not empty. Then, the Marquess of Ellingford had arrived with older blood, larger estates, and debts, better hidden than Cecily's own. Within a month, Cecily had wept. Within 2, she had written that affection could not overcome prudence. Within 3, the Marquess had chosen an heiress from Norfolk, and Cecily's prudence had returned to him dressed as regret. Adrian had mistaken that return for pain. He saw now that it might have been calculation polished until it reflected whatever a man wished to see. He had married Seraphina afterward because Lord Vane's proposal solved 2 problems. It ended speculation and joined an old name to Whit-more consequence. He had told himself he was doing a practical thing with a practical woman. He had not asked whether Seraphina had a heart. Worse, he had known she had one and chosen not to be responsible for it. "You left once," he said. Cecily's face went pale with anger too quick to hide. "I was young. You were ambitious. I was frightened. Of poverty, of being trapped. There was truth in that, and because there was truth, he did not dismiss it." Cecily's father had gambled away comfort and left his daughters to smile over empty accounts. Society forgave men their ruin and asked women to decorate the wreckage. Cecily had learned to survive by choosing the safest door, but survival did not make cruelty innocent. So you chose elsewhere, Adrian said. Then elsewhere closed. Her eyes shone, though no tear fell. You think I came back because I had nowhere else to go. I think you came back because Whit-more was still standing. And Seraphina? Was she more noble? Her father needed your name as much as mine needed money. Yes, the admission cut him. But she did not pretend otherwise. Cecily moved toward the writing table and rested her gloved fingertips on its edge. Too close to the ring. Adrian saw her notice it. Her gaze fixed on the gold for one heartbeat too long. She pretended to be content. No, he said quietly. She learned not to ask for what I had made clear I would not give. Cecily looked up sharply. You speak as though you love her. The room held the sentence. Adrian did not answer quickly enough, and that silence seemed to disturb Cecily more than any denial would have done. A footman appeared at the door with a silver tray. A note, Your Grace. From Lady Marcham's house. The messenger says it concerns the charity music hale. Cecily turned. How efficient of Lady Marcham. It was a small mistake. Too small for anyone but a man newly awake to notice. Adrian took the note and broke the seal. The card inside was elegant, crowded with names of patronesses, a list of performers, and a handwritten addition near the bottom. Her Grace the Duchess of Whit-more is most warmly invited, should she feel equal to appearing. Should she feel equal, not honored, not expected, displayed. Adrian's fingers closed around the card until it bent. You knew of this invitation. Cecily lifted her chin. Naturally. I helped Lady Marcham arrange the evening. It is for widows and distressed gentlewomen. I thought Seraphina might appreciate the cause, given her present position. Her present position is Duchess of Whit-more. Without her ring, the words escaped before she could dress them. Adrian looked at her, and whatever softness had remained between memory and habit died cleanly. You will leave now. You're making a mistake. I have made several. I am correcting one. Cecily's eyes glittered. Society never understood why you married her. Society was not asked. It will ask now. Then it will receive an answer it may regret. She stared at him, searching for the man who had once confused her return for devotion. He was no longer in the room. At last she gathered her reticule and swept toward the door, but pride slowed her at the threshold. She won't thank you for defending her after she has gone. Adrian looked down at the ring on his desk. Then I will have to learn to do right without being rewarded for it. Cecily left without another word. When the door closed, Adrian remained standing with the bent invitation in his hand. At the bottom, beneath Lady Marcham's elegant script, one name had been written among the stewards of the fund, Lord Pembury. Adrian read it twice. He thought of Cecily's precise word, delayed. He thought of Seraphina's empty place at the far end of the table. Then he rang for Havers. Send for my solicitor, he said, and have a groom ready for Helmsley Park by dawn. By the third morning, in Bath, Seraphina discovered that pity was easier to endure when it came from strangers who did not know enough to aim well. The ladies on Great Pulteney Street watched from windows as she crossed the pavement with Lady Honoria at her side, their curiosity softened by lace curtains and the distance proper people used when they wanted to be cruel without appearing eager. Some had already heard that the Duchess of Whit-more had left her husband. Others had heard she had been sent away. One lady, who wore mourning too new to be comfortable, stopped beside the circulating library and lowered her voice as though kindness required secrecy. Your Grace, I hope Bath air proves restorative. Seraphina inclined her head. Air is often more honest outside London. The lady blinked, unsure whether she had been thanked or corrected. Lady. Honoria looked straight ahead until they turned the corner, then said, My dear, you may survive this after all. I was not aware survival was in question. It always is when society discovers woman has ceased to be convenient. Seraphina almost smiled. That small almost had become her first sign of recovery. She still woke before dawn, expecting the long ceilings of Whit-more House and the cold space beside her name. She still reached for a ring that was not there. Yet Bath did not require her to preside over a house built around someone else's grief. Bath allowed her to be tired at breakfast, silent at luncheon, and useful by afternoon. Usefulness, when freely chosen, did not feel like invisibility, it felt like breath. They had gone out that morning because Lady Honoria wished to call upon Mrs. Eliza Gresham, a young widow lodging 3 streets away with a companion, 2 trunks, and a reputation too delicate for the men managing her late husband's affairs. The house was modest, with narrow stairs and a parlour that smelled faintly of coal smoke and lavender water. Mrs. Gresham rose when they entered, then faltered when she recognized Seraphina. "Your Grace, I didn't know Lady Honoria meant to bring a woman with more titles than sense," Lady Honoria supplied dryly. "Sit down, Eliza. Her Grace is not here to devour you, Mrs." Gresham's eyes filled with anxious gratitude. She was perhaps 24, pretty in a faded way, with a black gown altered too hastily and a wedding band hanging on a ribbon at her throat. On the table lay a folded paper, an inkstand, and a pen placed exactly where an impatient man might have set it before ordering a woman to sign. Seraphina noticed the tremor in the widow's fingers. "You have been asked to agree to something," she said. Mrs. Gresham looked from Seraphina to Lady Honoria. "Mr. Nettle says it is only a note acknowledging my husband's debts. He says if I sign today, he'll persuade the creditors to wait. If I don't, they'll take everything before Michaelmas." "May I see it?" Seraphina asked. Mrs. Gresham hesitated. "I don't wish to trouble you. Then let me trouble the paper instead." The widow gave a watery laugh and handed it over. Seraphina read quickly. It was not long, which made it more dangerous. The note did not merely acknowledge debt. It pledged Mrs. Gresham's widow's jointure as security for sums not clearly named, with interest left to be determined by the creditor's discretion. A woman in panic might sign away years of survival because the ink looked respectable. Seraphina set the paper down. Her voice was calm. "Do not sign this." Mrs. Gresham went pale. "But Mr. Nettle said, Mr. Nettle has written a trap and called it mercy." Lady Honoria leaned forward. "There. I knew I disliked the man. If creditors exist, they may state the amounts through proper correspondence," Seraphina said. "If your husband's estate is entangled, a solicitor must examine it before you pledge anything. You are not refusing duty. You are refusing confusion." Mrs. Gresham pressed both hands together. "He said a widow who delays payment dishonors her husband." Seraphina looked at the black ribbon at the young woman's throat, and something old and sharp moved inside her. Men who trade upon a woman's grief are rarely defending honor. They are usually counting on silence. A knock sounded below. Mrs. Gresham flinched. Lady Honoria rose at once. "If that is Mr. Nettle, he may discover how unpleasant I can be before luncheon." It was Mr. Nettle. He entered with the confidence of a small man, protected by large assumptions, his hat in his hand, and irritation already arranged on his face. When he saw Seraphina, he bowed too quickly. "Your Grace, I hadn't expected." "I imagine you hadn't." He cleared his throat. "I came to assist Mrs. Gresham with a necessary matter." "So did I." His eyes flicked to the unsigned paper. "The document is quite ordinary. Then you will not object to leaving it for review. Delay may prove costly. Improvidence often does." His face reddened. "Your Grace, with respect, this is a private concern." Seraphina stepped to the table and placed one gloved hand lightly atop the paper. "Then you should not have tried to make it a private surrender. Mrs. Gresham will not sign today. Mr. Nettle opened his mouth, looked at Lady Honoria, thought better of it, and bowed with stiff resentment. "As you wish." "As she wishes," Seraphina corrected Mrs. Gresham stared at her as if the difference were a gift. When the man had gone, the widow sank into her chair and began to cry quietly. Not from weakness, Seraphina thought, but from the terrifying relief of being told she still owned the right to pause. Seraphina did not comfort her with embraces. She merely folded the dangerous paper, placed it out of reach, and said, "Tomorrow we shall send for a solicitor who respects ink less than truth." By the time Seraphina and Lady Honoria returned home, a message was waiting in the hall. The maid presented it with round eyes. "A gentleman left this, your grace, Mr. Alden," he said. Lady Honoria removed her gloves slowly. "Show him in if he remains." "He does, ma'am." Mr. Alden entered carrying a leather case pressed beneath one arm. He was thin, grey at the temples, and nervous in the manner of honest men who had delayed honesty too long. He bowed to Lady Honoria, then to Seraphina. "Your Grace, I beg pardon for coming without formal appointment. If your errand concerns my father," Seraphina said. "Formality may wait," he swallowed. "It concerns your father, your marriage settlement, and Lord Pembury." The name altered the room. Lady Honoria's eyes sharpened. Mr. Alden opened the case and withdrew a narrow ledger page, torn at the edge. "I was a junior clerk when Lord Vane's affairs were settled before your marriage. I copied figures. I carried letters. I asked no questions because I was young, and because men of rank dislike questions from clerks." "What changed?" Seraphina asked. "I saw Lord Pembury in Bath yesterday. It reminded me of a transfer I should never have forgotten." He placed the fragment on the table. "This shows that the dowry funds assigned to the Whit-more settlement were present. Not abundant, perhaps, but present. They were redirected through an intermediary account 3 days before the final papers were delivered." Seraphina looked down. The numbers swam for a moment, then steadied. "Redirected by whom?" "The signature appears to be Lord Vane's." Mr. Alden's mouth tightened. "But I no longer believe it was his hand." Lady Honoria brought out the forged letter from the escritoire. "Nor was this." Mr. Alden examined it, and his face grew older while he read. "This phrase," he said softly. "Delayed sums. I remember that phrase. It appeared in a memorandum Lord Pembury brought to the office himself." Seraphina felt cold move through her. "Why would Lord Pembury involve himself in my settlement?" "Influence," Lady Honoria said. "Money, leverage. Men seldom trouble themselves for only one sin." Before Mr. Alden could answer, the maid returned, now visibly distressed. "Another note, your grace." A boy brought it to the kitchen door and ran. Seraphina took it herself. No seal, no signature. Only a few lines in a narrow, slanted hand. "Withdraw from the matter of the settlement. Let old arrangements sleep. If you pursue this, Lady Honoria's name will be joined to debts better left buried. A duchess may survive whispers. An old woman with little fortune may not." Seraphina read it twice. Her fear came quickly, but anger followed faster. Lady Honoria reached for the note. After reading it, she laughed once without humor. "How ungallant. I am promoted to hostage. I will not let him use you," Seraphina said. "My dear, he already has. The question is whether we allow it to work." Mr. Alden lowered his voice. "There is more. A groom wearing Whit-more livery has been keeping near the square since morning. Quietly, but not quietly enough." Seraphina closed her eyes for 1 second. Adrian. Even from London, he could not decide whether she was a woman or a possession placed on a road. "Please ask the groom to wait," she said. Lady Honoria watched her. "What will you do?" Seraphina sat at the small writing desk. Her bare left hand hovered over the paper, then steadied. She wrote with deliberate care. "Your Grace, I require respect more than surveillance. If you wish to assist me, seek truth, not control. Do not send men to watch my door unless I ask it. Lady Seraphina Vane, Duchess of Whit-more." She sanded the ink, folded the note, and handed it to the maid. "Give this to the groom. He is to return to London at once." When the door closed, Seraphina turned back to the ledger page, the forged letter, and the threat laid out before her, like pieces of a life someone else had tried to arrange. "Mr. Alden," she said, "tomorrow you will tell me everything you remember." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I have been quiet long enough." Adrian received Seraphina's note at dawn, and for the first time in 4 years, his wife's handwriting struck him as a closed door rather than a courtesy. "Your Grace, I require respect more than surveillance. If you wish to assist me, seek truth, not control. Do not send men to watch my door unless I ask it. Lady Seraphina Vane, Duchess of Whit-more." He read it once in the library at Whit-more House. He read it again in the carriage as London thinned into road, hedgerow, and grey morning fields. By the time the horses turned north toward Yorkshire, the words had stopped being accusation and become instruction. Respect, not surveillance. Truth, not control. He had sent the groom because fear had moved faster than wisdom. He had imagined danger near her door and answered it as a duke answered most things, by command, by men, by distance, by ownership disguised as care. Seraphina had seen the shape of it clearly and returned it to him without ornament. That was the cruelty of her dignity. It left him no place to hide. Helmsley Park rose late in the afternoon from a sweep of winter-browned grass and dark elms, its stone front severe beneath a sky the color of pewter. Adrian had not brought Seraphina there often. He had told himself she disliked the country. In truth, he had never asked. The house opened to receive him with the same restrained efficiency that had served generations of Whitmores. But there was unease beneath it. Servants bowed. Footman took his coat. Mrs. Beckett, the housekeeper, stood at the foot of the stairs with her keys at her waist and worry in every disciplined line of her face. Your Grace, we had not expected you before next week. Nor had I. Adrian removed his gloves slowly. Where is Mr. Rusk? Mrs. Beckett's expression tightened. The steward left yesterday morning, Your Grace. He said he had estate business in York. Did he take account books? A dispatch box, Your Grace. I did not see its contents. Adrian's jaw set. Send to the stables. I want a man on the York Road within the hour. No alarm. No accusation. Find where Rusk went. Yes, Your Grace. She turned to go, but Adrian stopped her. Mrs. Beckett. The housekeeper paused. Your Grace? I need to know what her Grace did here in my absence. Not what she was expected to do. What she actually did, Mrs. Beckett looked at him for a long moment, and in that look Adrian saw the judgment of a servant too loyal to speak it, and too honest to forget it. That may take some time, Your Grace. Then begin. She led him first to the estate office, where the air smelled of paper, dust, and neglect poorly disguised by polish. The ledgers in the cabinet were too neat. Adrian had reviewed enough accounts to know that honest books possessed small irregularities, ink blots, corrections, human hesitation. These looked prepared, not kept. Mrs. Beckett unlocked a lower drawer. Her Grace asked me to retain household memoranda separately when Mr. Rusk delayed payments. She said private records were not an accusation, only a precaution. Adrian looked down at the stack she placed before him. Seraphina's hand appeared on small notes pinned to receipts, clear and spare. Coal delivered, short by 3 sacks. Paid from personal allowance until accounts settled. Wages for lower maids delayed 6 days, advanced discreetly. Linen repairs deferred by steward, approved from Duchess's pin money. Every line was practical. None complained. The quietness of it made Adrian feel ill. Why was I not told? Mrs. Beckett's face did not change. Her Grace wrote to you twice, Your Grace, Mr. Rusk said the matters were too small for your attention and would be corrected before they reached you. And were they? Not until Her Grace corrected them herself. Adrian turned a page. A list of names appeared: kitchen maid, second laundry maid, under gardener's boy, each with a sum beside it. Small amounts. 6 shillings here, 4 there, £1 advanced before Christmas. The kind of money a duke never saw, unless it was missing from a grand total. The kind of money that decided whether servants ate meat, whether a mother sent coin home, whether a boy kept his place. Seraphina had known he had not. She never mentioned this. No, Your Grace. Mrs. Beckett's voice softened despite herself. Her Grace said a household should not be made to feel poor, merely because gentlemen preferred their accounts elegant. He closed the ledger. The room seemed smaller than before. Show me the rest. Mrs. Beckett hesitated. There is the music room. Adrian looked up sharply. It is closed. It was closed. The correction was careful. Her Grace had it cleaned last spring. Something in him recoiled before he could name it. The music room had belonged to his mother, then to the memory of Cecily, or rather to the foolish version of memory that made a man preserve pain because it excused emptiness. Cecily had once sung there during a house party before everything in him hardened. After she left him, he had ordered the room shut. He had not entered it since. Take me there, he said, Mrs. Beckett led him through the west corridor, past portraits of stern Whitmores who had managed to look disapproving even in oil. The music room doors stood at the end, pale wood set with brass handles. Adrian had expected dust. He had expected cold. When Mrs. Beckett opened the doors, he found warmth. Not display. Not intrusion, care. The curtains had been cleaned and rehung. The pianoforte had been polished without being moved from its place near the long windows. The faded carpet had been repaired along one edge. Fresh wax had sealed a crack in the floor near the hearth. There were no flowers, no sentimental alterations, no attempt to make the room cheerful by force. It had simply been allowed to breathe. Adrian stepped inside. His throat tightened with an emotion too complex to be grief alone. Who authorized this? Her Grace, Your Grace. She paid for the instrument to be tuned from her own allowance because Mr. Rusk refused the expense. Why? Mrs. Beckett looked toward the pianoforte. She said houses remember what families forbid them to speak of. Adrian crossed the room slowly. On the music stand lay a sheet of music, its corner marked by Seraphina's precise hand. Not a performance piece, a simple arrangement, gentle and restrained. At the top, in pencil, she had written, "For the day this house is no longer grieving." The words undid him more completely than tears could have done. He braced one hand on the edge of the instrument, careful of the bandage, and bowed his head. She had understood the room. She had understood him. She had not forced cheer upon his sorrow, or mocked the past he would not explain. She had restored what he had locked away, then left it waiting without asking credit. He had thought her quiet, because she had nothing to say. He had been surrounded by her language for years, and had refused to learn it. "Your Grace," Mrs. Beckett said softly. "There is something else." Adrian lifted his head. "Tell me." 3 months ago, Lady Cecily Marlowe wrote here, asking whether the music room remained closed. I thought it impertinent, and did not answer. A week later, Mr. Rusk asked for old household invoices from the year before your Grace's marriage. He said they were needed for estate comparisons. Did he receive them? Some, not all. Her Grace had already removed several papers to a private bundle after noticing Lady Cecily's name in correspondence tied to Lord Pembury. Adrian turned. Seraphina found Cecily's name? Yes, Your Grace. She asked whether Lady Cecily had ever sent musicians here, or received payment from the household. I could not say. Her Grace said not to trouble you until she had something firmer. Again the pattern. Seraphina trying to bring him truth. Other hands closing the road before it reached him. His own indifference helping them. Where is that bundle? Mrs. Beckett moved to a small cabinet near the window and withdrew a packet wrapped in brown paper. She told me to keep it unless she asked. Given what has happened, I believe she would want you to see it. Adrian accepted it with care. Inside were invoices, copied account entries, and one folded note in Cecily's looping hand, addressed to Mr. Rusk. Only a few lines remained, but they were enough to darken the room. Lord Pembury will settle the matter if the delayed sums can be made to appear connected to Lady Seraphina's side. No one must trouble His Grace with petty papers. Adrian read it once, then once more. Cecily's handwriting was unmistakable. Pembury's name stood there like a nail driven through silk. Send a rider to London, he said. His voice was quiet, which made Mrs. Beckett straighten. My solicitor is to meet me here, not in Mayfair. Another man is to go to Bath with a note for Her Grace. He will not watch her door. He will not follow her carriage. He will deliver the note to Lady Honoria's servant and leave. Yes, Your Grace, and Mrs. Beckett. Your Grace. Mr. Rusk is dismissed from my service as of this hour. If he returns, he is to be received in the estate office, with 2 witnesses present, and nothing more. Very good, Your Grace. She moved toward the door, then paused. Her Grace will be glad the room is open. Adrian looked at the music stand. No, he said after a moment. She will be glad if I learn why she opened it. Mrs. Beckett bowed and left him alone. Dusk had begun to gather beyond the windows. Adrian sat at the pianoforte bench without touching the keys. He thought of Seraphina's bare hand writing to him from Bath. Seek truth, not control. On the small table beside the instrument lay an invitation card, likely brought with the day's post, and set there by a servant who did not know its importance. He picked it up. Lady Marcham's Charity Musicale. Patronesses listed. Performers listed. Lord Pembury named among the gentlemen assisting the fund. At the bottom, in a smaller hand, appeared one additional line. Her Grace the Duchess of Whit-more has been invited, should she feel equal to appearing. Adrian stared at the sentence until the trap revealed itself. They did not merely mean to whisper about Seraphina. They meant to place her before society and watch whether she bled dignity. He stood, the note in one hand and Cecily's letter in the other. For the first time in years, Helmsley Park did not feel like a monument to what he had lost. It felt like a house waiting to see whether he could become worthy of what he still might save. The invitation arrived in Bath on cream card, so thick it might have been made to carry insult without bending. Seraphina found it on Lady Honoria's breakfast tray beside toast, marmalade, and a letter from Mr. Alden that contained 3 more numbers circled in a hand too anxious to be neat. Lady Marcham's Charity Musicale was written in elegant black script, with a list of patronesses long enough to make refusal noticeable and acceptance dangerous. At the bottom, where kindness should have been, someone had added the sentence Adrian had seen at Helmsley Park. Her Grace the Duchess of Whit-more has been invited, should she feel equal to appearing. Lady Honoria read it once, then poured tea with the controlled fury of a woman who had outlived the usefulness of surprise. How generous! They invite you as though you are an invalid exhibit. Seraphina touched the edge of the card. No. They invite me as though they expect me to be afraid. Are you? The answer should have been simple. Fear had become a companion since she left Mayfair, walking near her in shops, standing beside her at windows, waiting each time a footman brought a note. Yet fear was no longer the largest thing in her. Yes, she said, but I am more tired of being arranged by other people's expectations. Lady Honoria looked at her over the teacup. Then we shall choose a gown that tells them nothing except that you know your rank. Not silver, Seraphina said at once, remembering the dinner at Whit-more House, the ring-catching lamplight, Cecily's eyes lowering to it. No, Lady Honoria's voice softened. Not silver. By noon, Mr. Alden had come and gone with the ledger fragment hidden in a packet of household receipts. By afternoon, Seraphina had written no fewer than 4 replies to the invitation and burned 3. The final one accepted with perfect brevity. She did not write that she was wounded. She did not write that she came to defend herself. She wrote only that Her Grace the Duchess of Whit-more would attend under Lady Honoria Vane's escort. That was enough. The next morning brought a note from Adrian, delivered properly to Lady Honoria's servant, and carried no farther. Seraphina recognized his hand before she broke the seal. For a moment, she hated herself for how quickly her pulse answered. The letter was short. I will not send men to watch your door again. I have gone to Helmsley Park and begun inquiries into Rusk, Pembury, and the accounts. You were right to demand truth rather than surveillance. Lady Marcham's musicale appears designed to expose you. If you choose not to attend, I will answer it. If you choose to attend, I will not presume to stand before you, unless you permit it. She read the last line twice. Not Adrian, not your husband. Only A. It was the first letter he had written her that did not sound like a command wearing good manners. Lady Honoria waited until Seraphina folded it. Well, he knows it is a trap. Does he forbid you? No. Does he beg? Seraphina looked down at the folded paper. No. Promising. Men are often most useful when they stop making noise. Seraphina almost smiled, then slipped the letter into her reticule. It did not forgive him. It changed the shape of the room, in which forgiveness might someday stand. London received her 2 evenings later, with rain on the carriage windows, and rumour already warm in every drawing-room. Lady Marcham's house shone with benevolence from the outside, all lit windows and footmen in livery, but Seraphina knew a charitable crowd could be crueler than a political one. Cruelty felt cleaner when it was wrapped around the suffering of others. She descended from the carriage, in a gown of deep blue silk, with no ducal diamonds and no wedding ring. Lady Honoria stepped beside her in black velvet, sharp-eyed and unmovable. "Remember," her aunt murmured, "you owe no one a wound for their entertainment. I shall try not to provide one. Don't try. Refuse." Inside, music drifted faintly from the upper room, not yet a performance, only a pianist testing notes. Conversation thinned when Seraphina entered. It did not stop. That would have been honest. Instead, it changed tone, becoming lighter, brighter, and edged with attention. Faces turned, then turned away a fraction too late. Fans lifted. Men bowed. Women smiled as if smiling were proof of innocence. Lady Marcham came forward with an expression arranged between welcome and apology. "Your Grace, how brave of you to come. How charitable of you to invite me." Lady Honoria made a sound that might have been a cough. Lady Marcham coloured, but recovered. "We have placed you near the front, of course." Of course meant nothing. A footman led them into the music room, where chairs had been arranged in rows for the performance. The first row was occupied by patronesses of high standing, none of them above a duchess. The second held several elderly ladies, one marchioness and Lord Pembury, who stood beside an empty chair with theatrical politeness. Seraphina understood before the footman gestured. They had placed her not at the centre of precedence, but where everyone could see whether she accepted being lowered. "Here, Your Grace," Lady Marcham said brightly. "You will hear beautifully from this seat." Seraphina looked at the chair. Then she looked at Lady Marcham. "I am sure I would." Silence gathered by degrees. Lady Honoria's chin lifted. "However," Seraphina continued, "it appears Lady Eastham has been given a chair more appropriate to my rank, and I would not wish your arrangement to cause discomfort once others notice the mistake." Lady Eastham, a formidable old marchioness with a nose like a judgment, turned from the first row. Her eyes met Seraphina's. Something passed between them, perhaps memory, perhaps respect, perhaps simple dislike of poor tactics. "Lady Marcham," the Marchioness said, "Her Grace is correct. I wondered at it myself." Lady Marcham's smile tightened. "A footman's error, naturally." "Naturally," Seraphina said. She did not move until the chair was corrected. The room watched the small relocation as if it were a duel. When she sat in the first row, with Lady Honoria beside her, the humiliation intended for her settled instead on the hostess's hands. It was a small reversal. It was enough to make Cecily Marlowe's eyes narrow from across the room. Cecily wore pale lavender, a colour chosen to suggest wounded gentleness. She came forward after a suitable interval, her smile careful, her voice low. "Your Grace, I didn't know whether you'd feel equal to London again so soon. Then we are both educated tonight." Cecily's lashes lowered. "I hope you don't think the invitation unkind. I think many things become clear when placed before witnesses." Cecily's smile remained, but the softness left it. "That sounds almost like a warning." "No," Seraphina said, "only an observation." The room shifted again, more dramatically this time. Adrian had entered. He wore black, as he had the night everything broke, but something in him had changed. He did not look towards Cecily first. He did not search the room as a duke assessing territory. His eyes found Seraphina, stopped at her bare hand, and then rose to her face. He bowed. Not the distant bow he gave a duchess as household ornament, a full public acknowledgement of rank and injury. "Your Grace." The room understood the choice. Cecily understood it more than anyone. Seraphina inclined her head. "Your Grace." No one could call it intimacy. That made it harder to dismiss. Adrian turned to Lady Marcham. "I believe there was some confusion regarding Her Grace's place." Lady Marcham laughed too quickly. "Already corrected. See that it remains so." The words were not loud, they did not need to be. Lord Pembury stepped forward before the air could settle. "How fortunate that we are all assembled in the cause of distressed gentlewomen. London is rich in them this week." Adrian's gaze moved to him. "Lord Pembury, Your Grace." Pembury bowed, but his eyes slid towards Seraphina. "I had hoped to speak with Her Grace privately after the performance. A matter of family history, old obligations. Nothing that need trouble the music. If it concerns me," Seraphina said, "it may trouble me directly." A few heads turned. Pembury smiled as though he had waited for exactly that. As you wish. Though I fear directness can be painful, confusion is more so. The first performer began, sparing the room from replying. Seraphina sat through a song about lost spring and a violin piece that trembled with more nerves than melody. She felt Adrian 3 chairs away, not touching, not speaking, yet present with a restraint that made her more aware of him than if he had stood beside her. Cecily watched them both from across the aisle. Pembury waited. That was the worst of it. He did not fidget or whisper. He waited with the patience of a man who believed he had brought the ending in his pocket. When the final applause faded, Lady Marcham rose to thank the performers. Before she could call for tea, Pembury stepped into the open space near the pianoforte. Forgive me, Lady Marcham, but before we disperse, there is a small matter tied to the charitable accounts and, regrettably, to the name of Vane. The room stilled. Adrian stood at once. Choose your next words with care, Pembury bowed. I always do, Your Grace. His hand went inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. I possess documents suggesting that Lady Seraphina's family deceived the Duke of Whit-more before the marriage. More than that, I possess a letter written in Lady Seraphina's own hand. Seraphina felt the room turn toward her, not with pity now, with appetite. Cecily lowered her gaze to hide a smile. Adrian looked at Seraphina, and for the first time since the carriage from Bath, she wished she still wore gloves thick enough to hide the cold in her fingers. Pembury lifted the letter. If her grace permits, perhaps truth should also be placed before witnesses. The paper in Lord Pembury's hand seemed too small to carry ruin, and yet every person in Lady Marcham's music room looked at it as though it had begun to smoke. Seraphina stood very still near the first row, with Lady Honoria at her left and Adrian 3 chairs away, close enough for protection and too far for certainty. The air smelled of extinguished candles, warm silk, and lavender. That last scent reached her faintly when Pembury unfolded the letter, and for one strange instant her mind went not to scandal but to Lady Honoria's parlour, to old paper, to a forged line about delayed sums, lavender, Cecily's favourite scent. Cecily stood near the pianoforte, her gloved hands folded, her expression arranged into sorrow, so delicate it might have been painted on porcelain. Lord Pembury, Adrian said, you will not read private correspondence before this assembly. Pembury bowed with polished regret. I would not dream of troubling the assembly with anything merely private, Your Grace. This concerns charitable confidence, family solvency, and the integrity of a marriage settlement that touched one of the greatest houses in England. Lady Marcham made a weak sound. Perhaps this might be delayed until after tea. Truth delayed becomes deception protected, Pembury replied. The phrase pleased him. Seraphina saw it in the slight lift of his mouth. He had practiced this. Every word had been chosen to make refusal look like guilt. Adrian took one step forward. Hand me the letter. Pembury held it back. With respect, Your Grace, you are hardly a neutral party. A murmur moved through the room. A duke was not often denied in public, a husband even less so. Seraphina felt the old machinery of rank grind against the sharper hunger of scandal. For one breath, she wanted Adrian to take the letter, tear it in two, and end the room's appetite by force of will. Then she remembered her own note. Respect, not control. Truth, not surveillance. She lifted her chin. Let him read it. Adrian turned to her. Seraphina. The name was quiet, nearly private, and it nearly undid her. If he has brought a lie, it must learn to stand where it can be seen. Pembury smiled. Admirably brave. Do not mistake necessity for admiration, my lord. Lady Honoria shifted just enough that her shoulder almost touched Seraphina's. It was the smallest support, and therefore the strongest. Pembury cleared his throat and began. My dear Lord Pembury, I write in confidence regarding the settlement agreed before my marriage to His Grace, the Duke of Whit-more. My father has assured me the delayed sums will be concealed until after the ceremony, and I am to say nothing unless the deficiency is discovered. I trust your discretion, as any delay now would undo us all. Seraphina. Vain, the last 2 words fell into the silence like a verdict. Someone inhaled sharply. Lady Marcham covered her mouth with her fan. Across the aisle, Lady Eastham's brows drew together, not in belief but in severe consideration. Cecily lowered her eyes. It was the wrong gesture. A woman truly pained by another woman's disgrace looked at the fallen person, if only to display pity. Cecily looked at the floor because her face could not be trusted. Seraphina heard her own pulse. She had not written those words. She had never called Lord Pembury my dear anything. She had never discussed her father's settlement with him. Yet the handwriting on the page, held open between Pembury's gloved fingers, was close enough to her own that doubt entered the room like cold water beneath a door. Adrian saw it too. He did not speak at once. He looked at the letter. His eyes moved over the lines, the signature, the tilt of the capital S 1 second, perhaps less. But he hesitated. Seraphina saw that hesitation before anyone else named it. It was not long enough to condemn her. It was long enough to tell her that some part of him had still needed proof to choose her innocence. The room widened around that second, until she felt herself standing alone in the center of it. Public accusation was survivable. His pause was the wound. Adrian looked up, and the moment he met her eyes, he knew what he had done. His face changed. Not much. Enough. That letter will be examined, he said. By whom? Pembury asked lightly. By my solicitor. Your solicitor may be loyal to your wishes. Then by 3, if you prefer witnesses. How generous, yet the essential matter remains. Her Grace has not denied the hand. The room turned again towards Seraphina. They wanted tears now, anger, collapse. Anything they could carry home and improve with repetition. She felt Lady Honoria beside her, steady as a wall. She felt Adrian's regret, sudden and useless, reaching toward her from across the polished floor. She did not take it. Then let a solicitor examine it, Seraphina said. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt, which was a mercy and a weapon. I will not be ruined by a whisper dressed as evidence. Lady Eastham made a low approving noise in her throat. Lord Pembury's smile thinned. A memorable phrase, Your Grace. But society is not a court. It rarely waits for experts. Society is poorly bred. The silence changed. Not kindly, attentively. Seraphina stepped forward, not toward Pembury exactly, but toward the space he had tried to claim. You say I wrote to you before my marriage. The letter says so. That is not what I asked. Do you say it? Pembury's eyes narrowed. I say I received it. From whose hand? A messenger, named? I cannot be expected to remember every errand boy from 4 years ago. Convenient. A few fans stilled. Seraphina held out her hand. May I see it? Adrian moved at once. You do not have to touch it. She looked at him then. No, I do not have to. I choose to. The words struck him more visibly than anger would have done. Pembury hesitated, then extended the letter because refusing would look too much like fear. Seraphina took it by the edge. The paper was fine, expensive, and faintly scented. Lavender again. Not strong enough to be obvious. Strong enough for a woman who had once watched Cecily write notes on lavender paper in Whit-more House. Seraphina lowered her gaze to the signature. It was good. Too good. A forger who merely copied shape often forgot rhythm. This person had studied hers. Yet there in the final line was a flaw she almost missed. She did not cross the lower stroke of the V in vain that way. Her father had. Someone had blended both hands, perhaps from family papers, perhaps from old letters. This is clever, she said. Thank you, Pembury replied, then realized too late how the words sounded. A few heads turned. His jaw tightened. I mean, it appears clear. Adrian held out a hand. Seraphina, she did not give the letter to him, not yet. Lady Honoria, will you stand witness that I state this calmly? Gladly, Lady Honoria said. You are calm enough to irritate every villain in the room. A startled cough came from somewhere behind them. Even Lady Eastham's stern mouth twitched. Seraphina turned the paper slightly toward the lamps. This letter is false. It resembles my hand, but resemblance is not identity. It also carries a scent I associate with another person's stationery. Cecily's head lifted. Too quickly. Adrian saw it. Seraphina saw him see it. For one aching instant, they were joined not by forgiveness, but by recognition. Pembury reached for the paper. I have no intentions of having it perfumed into innocence. Adrian stepped between them then, not touching Seraphina, but making Pembury stop by the fact of his rank. You will not snatch at my wife, my wife. The words moved through the room with force. Seraphina felt them, but they did not heal what had happened. A claim was not trust, not yet. The letter will go to a solicitor, Adrian said. Tonight Pembury bowed with false ease, as your grace wishes. I only hope the inquiry brings peace rather than further distress. It will bring truth, Seraphina said. Distress may choose its own host. Cecily stepped forward, pale but composed. Surely we needn't continue this before the guests. Seraphina, I'm so sorry. It must be dreadful to have old family matters exposed. It is, Seraphina turned to her. Almost as dreadful as watching someone pretend sorrow while waiting to be applauded for it. Cecily's face hardened for less than a heartbeat. Then hurt returned, beautiful and useless. I don't understand why you would say that. No, Seraphina said. I imagine you hoped I would say much less. Adrian looked from Cecily to the letter, and a new understanding darkened his face. Too late for the second he had hesitated. Not too late for the truth. Lady Marcham finally found her voice and invited everyone to tea, as though tea had ever repaired a public accusation. The room broke into clusters, each one whispering behind lowered lashes and bright china. Seraphina handed the letter to Lady Honoria, not Adrian. He noticed. Pain flickered across his face. She took one step away. He followed only with his eyes. Seraphina, he said softly. She paused. I should have known. Yes, she said. Nothing in her voice was cruel. That made it worse. He removed a clean handkerchief from his coat, perhaps because her fingers still held a trace of lavender-scented paper, perhaps because offering something was easier than bearing the fact that he had failed to offer belief quickly enough. She looked at the white linen in his hand, then she took it, folded it once, and placed it back against his palm. Keep it, Your Grace. You may need it for your conscience. Around them, conversation continued too loudly. Cecily turned aside near the pianoforte, her reticule open just long enough for Adrian to glimpse a small silver flask tucked inside, engraved with violets and carrying, when she closed it, the faintest breath of lavender. Seraphina saw his eyes sharpen. She did not ask what he had noticed. She had given him a task once, find witnesses, not excuses. Now he had another, believe faster than pride. She moved toward Lady Honoria, who already held the forged letter as though it were a snake asleep on paper. Behind her, Adrian stood alone in the charitable glow of Lady Marcham's music room, surrounded by society, rank, and the ruin of a single second. Adrian came to Bath in rain, which seemed appropriate, though Seraphina refused to grant the weather the dignity of symbolism. It was only rain, thin and persistent, silvering the pavement outside Lady Honoria's house, and making the horses stamp in irritation, while the groom held the carriage door. She watched from the parlour window as His Grace Adrian St. Ormond, Duke of Whit-more, stepped down without haste. He wore a dark travelling coat and no hat, and for one foolish instant she noticed that the rain had touched his hair before she noticed the leather case in his hand. Evidence, then. Not merely apology. That was better. It was also worse, because evidence had a way of arriving after the heart had already learned the shape of doubt. Lady Honoria stood beside the tea table, arranging cups with the severity of a general placing troops. You may still refuse to receive him. No, Seraphina said. If he has found something, I must hear it. And if he has come to bleed regret all over my carpet, then you may charge him for the cleaning. Lady Honoria's mouth moved almost into a smile. The maid opened the parlour door a moment later and announced him. Adrian entered, bringing the cold air with him for one breath, before the door closed behind him. He bowed first to Lady Honoria and then to Seraphina, not claiming the room, not claiming her, not even attempting the familiarity that marriage would have permitted a better man. Lady Honoria. Your Grace. Seraphina inclined her head. Your Grace. The formality struck between them and remained standing. He accepted it. That at least was new. Lady Honoria gestured to a chair opposite Seraphina, near enough for conversation and far enough for propriety. Sit down, Duke. I dislike towering men in small parlors. They make the furniture look accused. Adrian obeyed. He placed the leather case on his knee, but did not open it at once. His right hand was nearly healed, though a strip of linen still marked the place where Crystal had reminded him too late that control was not the same as strength. Seraphina did not look at it twice. He saw that she did not. I found proof that Lady Cecily uses lavender ink, he said. No preamble, no plea. A small silver flask was in her reticule last night. I had already discovered a note in her hand at Helmsley Park, linking Lord Pembury to altered accounts. Lady Honoria took her seat slowly. That is useful. There is more. Adrian opened the case and withdrew 2 papers. Mr. Rusk, my former steward, handled estate correspondence that should have reached me. Some of Her Grace's concerns about irregular accounts were kept from me. Lord Pembury's name appears in connection with a transfer made before the marriage settlement was finalized. I have sent copies to my solicitor. He laid the papers on the low table, then withdrew his hand rather than pushing them towards Seraphina, as if she were a clerk summoned to approve his diligence. The forged letter from last night carries the same scent. I should have recognized that sooner. Seraphina looked at the papers. She did not touch them. Yes. The word was quiet. It hit him anyway. He accepted the blow without flinching into defense. I should have recognized more than scent. Lady Honoria poured tea. This is the part where men usually explain that shock rendered them temporarily stupid. Adrian looked at her. It did not. I was not shocked enough. That was the fault. Seraphina looked up despite herself. He was pale but composed, not cold. Composure, she was beginning to understand, could be a wall or a handrail. The letter resembled my hand, she said. It did, Adrian answered, and for 1 second you looked at it as though it might have been mine. The room became very still. Rain moved down the window in clear threads. Adrian's gaze did not shift. I did. The admission was so bare that it gave her nowhere to put the anger except where it belonged. That second was longer than the reading of the letter. I know, do you? Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. For 4 years I lived in a house where I was careful not to disturb your grief. I learned when to speak, when to be silent, where to stand, which rooms were memories I must not touch. I never asked for affection in public. I never demanded an answer before guests. I kept your servants paid when your steward delayed wages. I wrote to you about accounts and heard nothing back. Then a man with a scented forgery stands before London, and you need 1 second to decide whether I am capable of deceit. Adrian's face tightened, but he did not look wounded on his own behalf. That mattered. You are right. That does not repair it. No. Lady Honoria set a cup before him. Drink. It will give you something to do besides deserve this. Adrian almost smiled, but the expression vanished before it became self-pity. At Helmsley Park, Mrs. Beckett told me you restored the music room, he said to Seraphina. She should not have troubled you. She did not trouble me. She indicted me without raising her voice. Seraphina's fingers closed around her teacup. The room was not at fault for your pain. Nor were you. The words entered softly. They did not ask to be believed. I treated you as if you were the consequence of someone else's betrayal. I see that now. Seeing it now does not excuse failing to see it then. Seraphina looked away first, not because she yielded, but because truth spoken too late could still be painful. Lady Cecily always stood between us, she said, not only in rooms, in every explanation I tried to offer. Adrian stilled. Tell me. There were letters I wrote about Mr. Rusk's delays. I asked whether Lord Pembury had any legitimate involvement with the settlement. I tried once to speak to you after a dinner in June, when I had seen Lady Cecily pass a note to Mr. Rusk in the corridor. You left the room with her before I reached you. I remember the dinner. Do you remember me? He closed his eyes once. When he opened them, remorse had sharpened into something steadier. No. That is the answer that shames me. Lady Honoria gave a small approving nod, as though honesty had passed an examination, but not yet earned a certificate. Before Seraphina could answer, the maid appeared with a note on a tray. "A boy brought this to the kitchen door, my lady." He would not wait. Lady Honoria took it, read the first lines, and her mouth lost all humor. She handed it to Seraphina. The handwriting was narrow and slanted, the same as the earlier warning. Seraphina read aloud, because secrecy had become the enemy. "If her grace persists, Lady Honoria Vani's old obligation to the Harbury estate will be recalled before those who remember her brother's disgrace. Withdraw the forged letter claim and the matter sleeps. Continue, and even Bath will learn that respectable widows may shelter fraud." Lady Honoria sighed. How tiresome. "I am too old to be blackmailed by men who cannot write gracefully," Adrian stood. "I can silence Pembury." Seraphina looked up quickly. "How? By rank, by solicitor, by refusing him entry anywhere my influence reaches, by making it known that any man repeating his accusations will answer to me." "That is power," Seraphina said. "It is not yet justice. It may protect you while justice is gathered. It may also make it appear that the Duke has frightened people into silence, because his wife cannot bear examination." Adrian stopped. The old version of him would have answered too quickly. This one listened, and the listening hurt more than command. "What do you ask of me?" he said. Seraphina rose and moved to the small writing table where Lady Honoria kept the forged letter, Mr. Alden's ledger fragment, and now Pembury's threat. She touched none of them. Find witnesses. Not excuses. Not men who will say what you wish because you are a duke. Witnesses who saw money move, papers disappear, seals removed. Find Rusk. Find whoever carried messages between Pembury and Cecily. Let the truth stand without needing your title to hold it upright." Adrian bowed his head once. "I will. And do not stand before me unless I ask it." His eyes lifted to hers. "May I stand beside you?" The question was plain. It held no demand. Seraphina felt the danger of it, because part of her wanted to answer from the memory of the man she had hoped he might become. She answered from the woman she had fought to remain. Not yet. He accepted that too. "Then I will earn the right to ask again." Lady Honoria leaned back. "Good. Now that the two of you have behaved with almost alarming sense, we must determine why." "Pembury thinks my name useful." She rose, crossed to the old escritoire near the wall, and removed a small key from the chain at her waist. "Years ago, after your father's death, Seraphina, I held a duplicate packet related to your mother's portion and your marriage settlement. I thought it unimportant once the marriage was complete. That may have been foolish." "Nothing in this matter has been unimportant," Adrian said. Lady Honoria unlocked the escritoire. The hinge gave a soft complaint. Inside were tied letters, household bills, a miniature in a cracked case, and a flat packet wrapped in blue paper. She drew it out and placed it on the table. The ribbon was intact, the wax was not. Where the original seal should have held the fold closed, only a torn, dull mark remained. Someone had cut it away. Seraphina stared at the mutilated paper. Adrian's expression hardened, not with anger alone, but with the recognition of a path finally visible. Lady Honoria touched the missing seal with one fingertip. "Well," she said softly. "It seems the past has been opened before us." Seraphina looked at Adrian. This time he did not reach for the packet. He waited. Only when she gave the smallest nod did he step closer. The missing seal changed the shape of every silence in Lady Honoria's parlor. Before, the forged letters had been cruel. The threats had been brazen. Now the torn packet proved something colder, that someone had entered the past with a knife, removed what could identify truth, and trusted grief, rank, and habit to keep every decent person looking elsewhere. Seraphina did not sleep that night. She sat by the small parlor fire while Lady Honoria dozed in a chair, and Mr. Alden's memoranda lay sorted on the table beside the mutilated packet. Adrian remained at a nearby inn because propriety required distance, and because Seraphina had not asked him to stay. Yet before he left, he had stood in Lady Honoria's doorway and accepted her instructions as if receiving terms after surrender. No men near the square, no commands sent in her name. No confrontation without her consent. He had bowed and said, "I understand." She had believed he meant it. Belief, however, was not the same as trust. Trust had to enter a room where danger waited, and not take over merely because it was afraid. By morning, Seraphina knew what must be done. "Lord Pembury believes we have a copy of the settlement," she said over breakfast. "Then we shall let him believe we have found it." Lady Honoria buttered toast with alarming calm. "My dear, that is either strategy or lunacy. Fortunately, I have always found the two useful in combination." Mr. Alden arrived before noon, pale from lack of sleep, but steady enough to take notes. Adrian came half an hour later with his solicitor, Mr. Bellamy, a dry, narrow man whose respect for facts seemed greater than his respect for dukes. That recommended him to Seraphina at once. They gathered in Lady Honoria's parlour, where the curtains were half drawn against the watery light, and the tea tray sat untouched. "Lord Pembury's messenger watches the mews," Mr. Alden said. "He will carry any careless sentence straight back to his master." "Then he shall hear one," Seraphina replied. She looked at Adrian. "This must be mine to begin." His eyes held hers. The old Adrian would have objected. The new one did not look comfortable, but comfort was not the test. "Tell me where you want me," he said. "Behind the study door with Mr. Bellamy and Mr. Alden. It stands near enough for you to hear. You will not enter unless I ring the small bell once. And if he threatens you?" Lady Honoria's brows lifted. "She has been threatened by professionals and amateurs all week, Duke. Try not to look so astonished." Adrian's mouth tightened, but he gave Seraphina the answer she had asked of him. "I will wait for the bell, not for your temper, for the bell." Those 3 words cost him something. She saw it, and because she saw it, she did not soften the plan. The bait was laid before luncheon. Lady Honoria's maid was sent to order ribbon, and allowed, with excellent clumsiness, to mention that Her Grace had discovered a duplicate settlement copy hidden in an old blue packet. By 4 o'clock a note arrived from Lord Pembury, asking to call on a matter of urgent delicacy. Lady Honoria read it aloud and smiled. A rat with manners is still a rat. Pembury came at 5, dressed with the care of a man who expected to leave victorious. He entered the parlour and bowed first to Lady Honoria, then to Seraphina, with just enough deference to make insult difficult to name. "Your Grace, Lady Honoria. I regret disturbing your quiet." "No, you don't," Lady Honoria said. "But do sit down." His smile faltered, then recovered. "I shall stand. My errand is brief." Seraphina sat near the writing table, the blue packet visible at her elbow but not open. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. She knew Adrian stood beyond the study door. She knew every instinct in him would strain toward the room. For once, his silence was not neglect. It was obedience. "You have been misled," Pembury said. "By whom?" Seraphina asked. "By Alden, perhaps. By your aunt's memory. By grief. Old papers can confuse even careful women. Can they? Indeed. I came to spare you embarrassment before matters grow public." "How considerate." He glanced toward the packet. "Whatever you believe you have found will not help you. The settlement was mishandled by your father. His Grace was deceived. If you persist, the world will ask why a bride said nothing. The world may ask. I shall answer." Pembury's eyes narrowed. "With what? A torn packet and a clerk's nerves. His Grace may indulge you now because regret makes men theatrical, but he will tire of defending a woman whose family cost him money and dignity." Seraphina felt the words strike where they were aimed. They did not move her. "You speak often of His Grace's dignity. How much did you expect to gain from protecting it?" "Careful. I am." She touched the blue packet. "That is why I made copies before sending the original to a solicitor." Pembury went still. It was beautiful, that stillness. Not because it was fear alone, but because it was calculation interrupted. "There is no original that can assist you. You seem certain because I know what was in it." Lady Honoria's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Seraphina did not look toward the study door. She did not ring. Pembury noticed nothing except his own need to regain ground. "Your aunt held an irrelevant packet," he said quickly. "A sentimental duplicate. A seal proves nothing. Then why remove it?" The room tightened. Pembury's face changed. "I beg your pardon." The seal was cut away. "If it proved nothing, why take it? You assume I know. I assume you came here because you fear what we know." He stepped closer to the table. not near enough to touch her. Near enough to remind her that men like him trusted height, anger, and a woman's reputation to do half their work. You are playing a dangerous game, Your Grace. Lady Cecily has already suffered enough from this unpleasantness. She needed assistance, yes. Her father left debts that would have destroyed her prospects. I arranged certain temporary matters. That is not villainy, it is survival. Seraphina's heart gave one hard beat. Cecily needed money. Pembury needed access. The shape was there now. Temporary matters, she repeated. Forged letters. Altered accounts. A missing seal. Do not be naive, Whit-more. Wealth could absorb inconvenience. Your father was dead. Cecily had no protector. I corrected an imbalance. By making me the lie. By making you useful. The words landed cleanly. Lady Honoria's face went white with anger, but she did not speak. Behind the study door there was no sound. Adrian waited. He was doing exactly what she had asked. The realization nearly shook her more than Pembury's confession. Seraphina reached for the small silver bell on the table. Pembury saw the movement too late. One clear note rang through the parlor. The study door opened at once. Adrian entered with Mr. Bellamy and Mr. Alden behind him. He did not stride to Seraphina's side as if rescuing a fainting woman. He stopped where they had agreed he would stop, between Pembury and the door, leaving Seraphina seated with the packet before her and the victory in her own hands. Lord Pembury, Mr. Bellamy said, already writing. You have made several statements of interest. Pembury turned an ugly shade of grey. This is entrapment. Lady Honoria set down her cup. It is conversation. You were simply more honest than usual. Adrian looked at Pembury with a coldness so controlled it did not need volume. You will remain available to my solicitor. Your Grace, surely you don't intend to credit the word of frightened ladies and a resentful clerk. Adrian's gaze did not move. I intend to credit my wife. The sentence entered the room without ornament. Seraphina looked down at her hands, because if she looked at him too long, she might forget that one true sentence could not erase every false silence that had come before. Mr. Bellamy gathered the blue packet and his notes. Mr. Alden confirmed what he had heard. Pembury sputtered, retreated into rank, then found rank a poor shelter against a duke who had finally decided not to use it wrongly. Within minutes, he was gone, under strict instruction to appear at Mr. Bellamy's chambers in London. Only after the door closed did Seraphina realize she had nicked one finger on the old packet's torn edge. A tight-eyed bead of red marked the skin. Adrian saw it. He moved one step, then stopped. May I? He asked. Such a small question. Such a large difference. Seraphina held out her hand. He took a clean handkerchief and wrapped the cut with a care so restrained it made the air unsteady. His fingers did not linger. His eyes did. You waited, she said. You told me to. That has not always stopped you. No, his voice lowered. It will now. Lady Honoria, who was pretending not to watch and failing with dignity, cleared her throat. Before the two of you become sensible enough to alarm me, there is one more matter. She held up the outer envelope of a newly delivered card. Lady Cecily invites Her Grace to Whit-more House for a private gathering of concerned friends. Seraphina looked at the elegant hand, the careful seal, the arrogance of choosing her husband's house as a battlefield. Adrian did not reach for the card. He waited until she offered it. This time she did. Inside, Cecily had written only one line beneath the formal invitation. If truth is on your side, Your Grace, bring it home. Seraphina folded the card. The next room seemed very quiet. Then, she said, we shall. Whit-more House looked different when Seraphina returned to it by choice. The lamps burned as before. Marble steps had been washed to the same pale gleam, and the brass on the front door shone with the ruthless pride of a great London house. Yet nothing in her body answered it as home. Not yet. She sat in Lady Honoria's carriage, with her gloved hands folded in her lap, and the invitation from Lady Cecily Marlowe tucked inside her reticule. No ring circled her finger. No ducal diamonds weighed at her throat. She wore deep garnet silk because it neither apologized nor begged to be admired, and Lady Honoria had declared that a woman walking into a battlefield should not dress like a ghost. Adrian's carriage stood behind them, not before. He had not insisted they arrive together. He had not sent his crest ahead as a shield. He had merely written that the house would receive her according to her rank, that the witnesses she had approved would be present, and that no door would close behind her unless she wished it closed. That last line had sat with her all afternoon, not because it healed everything, because it understood the wound. "You may still turn the carriage around," Lady Honoria said. "That would be unwise." "I didn't ask whether it was wise. I asked whether you may." Seraphina looked toward the front steps, Mrs. Vale stood inside the open doorway with Havers behind her and 2 footmen placed at formal attention. "I may," Seraphina said, "and I will not." Lady Honoria nodded. "Then let them remember the difference." The footman opened the carriage door. For one breath, Seraphina remained seated, not from fear, but to feel the truth of the choice. She had left this house in silence after placing her wedding ring beside a wineglass. She returned without that ring, and without any promise that she would stay when the night ended. The thought steadied her. She stepped down. Mrs. Vale curtsied deeply, not with theatrical sorrow, but with the full respect due to the Duchess of Whit-more. "Your Grace." "Welcome home." The word struck too near the heart. Seraphina did not let it show. "Thank you, Mrs. Vale." Havers bowed. "Your Grace." "The blue drawing-room has been prepared as His Grace instructed. Lady Eastham, Lady Marcham, Mr. Bellamy, Mr. Alden, and Lord Pembury have arrived. Lady Cecily is expected shortly. And His Grace? In the library, Your Grace." He wished to know when you had entered before presenting himself. Lady Honoria's brows rose. Miracles multiply. A duke waiting to be summoned. Seraphina removed her gloves 1 finger at a time, then handed them to the maid without looking at her bare left hand. "Please inform His Grace that I have arrived." She had expected the hall to feel hostile. Instead, the senior servants stood in a line along the passage, their eyes lowered, their faces composed with the strain of feeling more than service permitted. Seraphina saw the 2nd footman, whose sister's wages she had once advanced. She saw the parlour maid she had spared after the broken saucer. She saw Mrs. Vale holding herself with a dignity that seemed almost like defence. None spoke beyond what duty allowed. All of them remembered. For the first time, Seraphina understood that invisibility had not been absolute. It had only been enforced from the wrong height. Adrian entered from the library. He stopped at a distance that gave her room to refuse him. His black coat was severe, his expression controlled, but not cold. His gaze moved once to her unringed hand, then rose to her face, and stayed there. "Your Grace, Your Grace." Lady Honoria looked between them with an expression that suggested she would tolerate ceremony for only so long before improving it with a knife. Adrian turned slightly toward the library door. "May I speak with you before the others are assembled?" "Lady Honoria may remain." Seraphina considered him. "You may." In the library, the fire had been lit, but the room no longer smelled of sealed anger and unused air. The desk had been cleared except for a small velvet case placed at its center. Seraphina knew what lay inside before Adrian touched it. He did not open it at once. "I have kept your ring here," he said. "Not in my pocket, not in my hand. Here." "Why?" "Because I needed to stop carrying it as though grief gave me a right to it." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than eloquence would have done. He opened the velvet case. The ring rested against dark blue lining, bright and terrible, the gold band holding the words she had worn alone. "It will not touch your hand again unless you choose it," he said. "Not tonight. Not for society. Not because I wish to undo the sight of you without it." Seraphina looked at the ring. The absence on her finger seemed to throb, but she did not reach for it. "You understand that tonight is not about our marriage. Yes, it is about my name. Yes, and if my name is restored, that does not restore us." His eyes held hers. "I know. Do you?" he breathed once slowly. "I am learning the difference between wanting forgiveness and deserving it. Tonight, I will protect the truth. I will not demand what only you can give." Lady Honoria, from the chair near the hearth, said, That is a better sentence than most men manage before supper. Adrian almost smiled. Seraphina did not, but something in the room loosened. She closed the velvet case with 2 fingers. Then let it wait, as you wish. He took the case and placed it in the drawer of the desk, leaving the key beside Seraphina rather than putting it in his own pocket. The gesture was small. It was not small. The witnesses? She asked. Adrian straightened. Lady Eastham, because she saw the letter read and has enough rank to make denial difficult. Lady Marcham, because her house was used. Mr. Bellamy and Mr. Alden for the papers. Mrs. Vale and Mrs. Beckett's written statement for the household accounts. Lord Pembury, because he must face what he said. Cecily, because she asked for truth to come home. And the room, arranged by rank, no one below you, will be placed as though judging you. Lord Pembury will stand when questioned. Cecily will not preside. Seraphina met his eyes. Good. Havers appeared at the door. Lady Cecily Marlowe has arrived, Your Grace. Adrian did not look away from Seraphina. Are you ready? She thought of the dining room, the wine glass, the public silence that had once tried to swallow her. Then she thought of Bath, Lady Honoria's steady voice, the widow saved from a debt note, Adrian waiting behind a door until she rang. Yes, she said. The blue drawing room had been remade into a chamber of consequence. Chairs stood in careful order, not theatrical, not crowded, but impossible to mistake. Lady Eastham sat near the fire like an old queen who had not been consulted enough in life and intended to correct the omission. Lady Marcham looked pale and over-jewelled. Mr. Bellamy stood beside a small writing table with documents arranged in a locked portfolio. Mr. Alden waited near him, nervous but resolute. Lord Pembury stood by the far window, his face composed in the strained manner of a man who had discovered too late that charm did not purchase every exit. When Seraphina entered, every person rose. Not halfway, not reluctantly, fully. Lady Eastham inclined her head first. Your Grace. The others followed. The sound of her title moved through the room, one voice after another, until it no longer felt like decoration. It felt like a restoration beginning. Adrian remained at her side, not ahead of her. He did not touch her arm. That restraint was more intimate than possession. The door opened again. Cecily entered in pearl grey satin, the shade pale enough to suggest bridal innocence while avoiding the vulgarity of white. A narrow locket hung at her throat, set with seed pearls and a tiny clasp. Seraphina's eyes went to it. So did Adrian's. Cecily noticed neither, or pretended not to. She smiled as though the room had been arranged for her comfort and Seraphina's correction. Your Grace, she said to Adrian, then turned to Seraphina. And Your Grace, how courageous of you to come without your ring. Seraphina did not look down at her hand. Courage has little to do with jewelry, Lady Cecily. Lady Eastham made another approving sound. Cecily's smile sharpened. I only meant that symbols matter. Society understands them. Society is often slow, Lady Honoria said, but even society can be taught. Adrian moved to the mantel and addressed the room. This gathering exists for one purpose. Accusations were made against Her Grace before witnesses. Tonight, evidence will be answered before witnesses. No person present is here to indulge gossip. If anyone cannot observe that distinction, that person may leave now. No one moved. Lord Pembury looked towards Cecily. Cecily did not look back. Her hand rose to the locket at her throat, briefly, protectively. Seraphina saw the movement and felt the trap, the truth, and the past gather in one small glittering object. Cecily lowered her hand and gave a soft laugh. How solemn you've made this, Your Grace. One might think the Duchess had come to trial. Seraphina stepped into the center of the room. No, she said. I have come to end one. Cecily's eyes flashed, then softened with dangerous skill. Have you? I wondered whether you came without a ring, because you know you've already lost. Cecily's question entered the room like perfume poured over smoke. For a moment no one answered it. Lady Eastham's fan stopped moving. Lord Pembury looked toward the door, as though calculating the distance to escape. Adrian stood beside the mantel, his face still, his eyes not on Cecily but on Seraphina. waiting for her to decide whether the first blow deserved a reply. It did not. Seraphina turned instead to Mr. Bellamy. Please begin with the settlement record. The solicitor opened his portfolio with dry precision. Paper made a small, orderly sound in the silence. The record before me is a copy retained by the late Lord Vane's office, confirmed against entries supplied by Mr. Alden, formerly clerk to that office, and supported by household memoranda obtained from Helmsley Park. It establishes that the funds assigned to Her Grace's marriage portion were present before the wedding. Lady Marcham's lips parted. Present, Mr. Bellamy said, as if he had no patience for emotional interpretations of numbers. Not missing, not concealed by Her Grace. Redirected. Lord Pembury gave a short laugh. A convenient word. Money travels through many hands before a marriage settlement is complete. Seraphina looked at him. Then you will have no objection to hearing whose hands. His laugh faded. Mr. Bellamy continued. 3 days before the final papers were delivered to His Grace's representatives, a memorandum introduced by Lord Pembury requested temporary redirection of certain sums through an intermediary. Account. The signature attached to Lord Vane's approval is inconsistent with his verified hand. Mr. Alden noticed the inconsistency at the time, but lacked rank and authority to challenge it. Mr. Alden, pale but steady, bowed his head. That is true. Cecily lifted one gloved hand to her throat. The seed pearl locket shifted against the pale satin. This is tedious, surely. No one disputes that clerks make errors. 4 is not an error, Lady Honoria said. It is ambition with ink. Cecily's gaze flicked toward her. How severe you are, Lady Honoria. Age is useful that way. Adrian stepped forward only enough to bring the room's attention back to him. Mr. Bellamy. The letter read at Lady Marcham's music hall. The solicitor lifted another paper. The letter Lord Pembury produced before witnesses, allegedly written by Her Grace before her marriage, has been examined against known samples. It imitates Her Grace's hand, but combines several habits belonging to Lord Vane's writing. It is a studied imitation, not an authentic letter. Pembury's face hardened. A solicitor in the Duke's employ would naturally say so. Then perhaps, Lady Eastham said from near the fire, you should have chosen a poorer forgery. The room went very quiet again, but this time the quiet did not belong to fear. It belonged to judgment. Seraphina felt it move beneath her feet, the first change in a floor that had once tilted against her. Cecily recovered first. Even if the letter is mistaken, Her Grace's family affairs were clearly compromised. One cannot blame society for wondering what she knew. Seraphina turned to her. One may blame society for preferring wonder to evidence. Cecily smiled sadly. You speak as though you've been persecuted. I've only ever pitied you. Yes, Seraphina said. That was one of your cruelties. A murmur passed through the room. Cecily's eyes flashed. I won't be insulted because your marriage failed. Adrian's voice cut through the words, low and controlled. My marriage did not fail because of my wife. Cecily looked at him quickly. So did everyone else. He moved from the mantel into the center of the room, not between Seraphina and the others, but beside her, with enough space left for choice. The shame in this house was never my wife. It was my failure to honor her. The sentence seemed to strike the walls and return changed. Lady Marcham lowered her eyes. Mr. Alden stared at the floor. Lady Eastham watched Adrian as though he had finally said something worth hearing. Seraphina did not move. If she let herself feel the full force of it now, she might forget that public truth was not the same as private repair. Yet the words entered her all the same. Not as rescue, as record. Cecily's composure thinned. How noble. A duke confessing neglect so everyone may admire him for it. Do not mistake accountability for theatre, Adrian said. I learned that from my wife. Cecily's hand returned to the locket. Seraphina saw it, and this time she did not look away. Lady Cecily, your locket is very pretty. The change was so sudden that several faces turned toward the pearls at Cecily's throat. Cecily's fingers closed around it. Thank you. I fail to see its relevance. The missing seal from Lady Honoria's packet was cut away. We have wondered where a person might hide so small a thing. Cecily laughed, but no warmth reached the sound. Do you accuse me of wearing evidence like jewelry? No, Seraphina said. I ask you to open it. I will do no such thing. Lady Eastham's fan opened with a snap. A refusal is not flattering, Lady Cecily. Pembury stepped forward. This has gone too far. Adrian looked at him. You will stand where you are. Rank held the man still more effectively than any hand could have done. Cecily's colour had begun to rise beneath her powder. You cannot demand this. No, Adrian said. I cannot. But Mr. Bellamy can state that your refusal will be noted before witnesses, and Lady Eastham can decide whether a lady who refuses a simple answer should remain under her patronage. Lady Eastham smiled without kindness. I am already deciding. Cecily looked from face to face, and found no softness strong enough to shelter her. At last, with fingers that shook despite her effort, she unclasped the locket. It opened with a tiny click. Something dull red-brown rested inside, folded against a curl of pale silk. Mr. Bellamy stepped forward at Adrian's nod, and took it with a small pair of tweezers from his case. He unfolded the piece carefully. Wax, he said, bearing part of a seal impression. Lady Honoria exhaled once. Not triumph, release. The veined seal, Mr. Alden leaned closer, and the mark from the packet. It matches the cut edge. Cecily's mouth trembled, then hardened. I kept it because Lord Pembury gave it to me. I didn't know what it meant. Pembury turned on her. Cecily, the use of her name ruined them both. Adrian saw it. Everyone did. Cecily's eyes blazed. Don't you dare. Mr. Bellamy removed a second small paper from the locket. There is also a note. Cecily went white. Adrian's face did not change, but his hand closed once at his side. Mr. Bellamy read, The seal is secured. If the forged letter is questioned, insist the Duchess knew of the delayed sums. Pembury, Lord Pembury's composure collapsed into indignation. That is not my hand, Mr. Alden spoke, quiet but firm. It is the same hand as the memorandum brought to Lord Vane's office. Lady Marcham whispered, Merciful heavens. Lady Honoria gave her a look. Mercy has been absent. Let us not summon it only for the guilty. Cecily stood very still, no longer porcelain, no longer wounded, only frightened and furious. You have all decided what you wish to believe. Seraphina met her eyes. No. That was what you counted on society doing to me. The words landed without ornament. Cecily looked away first. That was the moment the room changed completely. Not with applause, not with dramatic cries, with alignment. Lady Marcham rose and curtsied to Seraphina, shallow at first, then deeper when Lady Eastham's gaze sharpened. Your Grace, I owe you an apology. My house was used to distress you, and I permitted it. You did? Seraphina said. I am sorry, then correct what was said there. Lady Marcham swallowed. I will. Lady Eastham rose next. Any invitation under my influence will be closed to Lady Cecily Marlowe until this matter is answered to my satisfaction. Lord Pembury will find fewer doors open than he expects. Pembury gave a strangled sound. This is social murder over private papers. Adrian turned to him. No, it is consequence. Mr. Bellamy will expect you at his chambers tomorrow. If repayment, sworn statements, and surrender of all related correspondence are not arranged, the matter will proceed where your dignity cannot bargain with drawing rooms. Mr. Bellamy closed his portfolio. Chancery is slow, my lord, but it is not always blind. Cecily took one step toward Adrian. After everything, you'll ruin me for her. He looked at Seraphina before he answered, not for permission to speak, but because truth belonged first to the woman harmed by lies. I am not ruining you. I am refusing to let you survive by ruining my wife. Seraphina felt the title wife move through her differently this time. It did not claim, it acknowledged. Cecily's eyes filled at last, but the tears had arrived too late to govern the room. Havers opened the door at Adrian's signal. Lady Cecily's carriage, Adrian said, and Lord Pembury's. Separately. No one argued. Cecily passed Seraphina with her chin raised, but she did not speak. Pembury tried once more to bow as though leaving by choice. Lady Eastham did not look at him, which was perhaps the sharpest punishment London could deliver in a single evening. When the door closed behind them, the room remained silent. It was not the silence that had followed Seraphina's public dismissal, That silence had fed on her pain. This one made room for her to breathe. Lady Marcham approached again, more humble now. Your Grace, I will write tonight to every person present at the music hall. You will state that the letter was false. Yes. And that I requested examination before witnesses. Yes. Seraphina nodded. Then do so. One by one, the witnesses withdrew, leaving behind corrected titles, lowered eyes, and the faint smell of extinguished scandal. Lady Honoria kissed Seraphina's cheek in the hall and said she would wait in the carriage, because even warriors deserved a private battlefield after victory. At last, only Seraphina and Adrian remained in the blue drawing room. The velvet case lay on a side table, where it had been placed before the gathering began. Adrian did not move toward it. You may still leave, he said. I know if you do, the correction stands. The settlement will be amended for your independence. Your name will be protected. Not as my mercy, as your due. Seraphina looked at the case, then at the man who had once told her she could go, because pride had cornered him, and now told her the same, because honor had finally taught him how to open a door. And if I stay, his voice roughened, though it stayed low, then I will spend my life learning how not to make you regret it. She crossed to the table and opened the velvet case. The ring waited in the dark lining, unchanged and impossible. She did not touch it yet. What would it mean? She asked softly. If I wore it now, Adrian stood very still. Only what you choose it to mean. That answer at last was worthy of silence. Seraphina did not put the ring on that night. She closed the velvet case with care, placed her palm upon it for one quiet second, and told Adrian she needed time for the question to become an answer. He bowed his head and did not argue. That was the first evening in their marriage, when restraint felt less like distance and more like respect. 3 weeks later, a ducal carriage brought her to Helmsley Park, beneath a pale Yorkshire sky, but it was not the same journey she had once taken, as a bride trained for duty and silence. This time, Lady Honoria travelled beside her for the first half of the road, inspected Adrian's written invitation as though it were a treaty between nations, and only then agreed to stop at an inn 10 miles from the estate to visit an old friend and leave Seraphina to complete the final distance alone. Independence, Lady Honoria said, while adjusting her gloves, doesn't mean never trusting anyone. It means knowing you may leave if trust is betrayed. Seraphina held her aunt's hand. I know, good. And if he becomes foolish again, write to me before supper. Aunt, what? I believe in romance. I simply prefer it supervised by good sense. Seraphina laughed then, softly and fully, and the sound surprised her. It stayed with her after the carriage moved on, warming the small space between her ribs where fear had lived for too long. When Helmsley Park appeared across the open sweep of land, she did not flinch from it. The great stone house stood stern and grey, yet its windows caught the afternoon light, as if something inside had been permitted to wake. No banner flew, no grand display had been arranged. Adrian had known better. Instead, the drive had been swept clean, the front door stood open, and the servants waited not in spectacle but in order. Mrs. Beckett stood at the head of them, her keys at her waist, her face composed until Seraphina stepped from the carriage. Then the housekeeper's eyes brightened. Your Grace, she said, curtsying deeply. Welcome to Helmsley Park. Not welcome back, welcome. Seraphina understood the kindness of that choice. It did not pretend the past had been simple. It offered a beginning without lying about the road. Thank you, Mrs. Beckett. Her gaze moved along the line. The footman bowed. The maids curtsied. The old gardener stood near the side entrance, with his cap in his hands, though he had no duty indoors. These were not the startled servants of a house guarding scandal. They were people who had seen quiet labor, had remembered it, and now stood witness to its return. Adrian waited in the hall, not on the steps, not outside, like a man displaying possession before his household. He stood within the house, leaving the threshold hers to cross. He wore a dark coat, and the severity of him had softened only in the eyes. Your Grace, he said. Your Grace, she answered. The servants heard formality. Seraphina heard patience beneath it. Adrian turned slightly. Mrs. Beckett has prepared the morning room for tea if you wish to rest first. Or I can show you what has been changed. Changed? Opened, he said. That may be the better word. She followed him through the west corridor, past the portraits that once seemed to judge every living person for breathing too loudly. The doors at the end stood open. The music room was warm with late light, not transformed beyond recognition, restored. The curtains had been cleaned, the carpet mended, the pianoforte polished, and a modest fire burned in the hearth. On a nearby table lay several letters, stacked and sealed, not hidden. Adrian stopped before them. Copies have gone to Lady Eastham, Lady Marcham, and every patroness who received the false account. Mr. Bellamy has secured Pembury's sworn statement and repayment terms. If he breaks them, Chancery will receive the matter. Cecily has left London for a cousin's house in Kent. No hostess of consequence will receive her until the truth is answered publicly and properly. Seraphina looked at the letters, then at him. You did not need to tell me all of that in the first minute. No, he said. But I needed you to know the correction did not end when witnesses left the room. And the settlement? He moved to the table and lifted a folded document, but he did not place it in her hands until she extended them. Amended. Your allowance is secured independently. Certain jewels are yours outright, not held at my pleasure. Helmsley Park's household accounts will be reviewed by a steward you approve. If you choose to live apart at any time, arrangements are already made without requiring you to ask my permission. Seraphina read the first lines. The language was formal, dry, and deeply unromantic. It nearly made her weep. You have built me a door, Adrian's voice lowered. I should never have made you need one. She looked down at the paper until the words steadied. Thank you. It isn't generosity. No, she said. That is why I can thank you. A faint movement crossed his face, not pain exactly, but humility accepting its place. He turned toward the pianoforte. There is one more thing. On the music stand lay the sheet she had marked months ago, for the day this house is no longer grieving. Beside it rested a small velvet case. Seraphina looked at it for a long moment before Adrian spoke. I had the ring returned to the goldsmith. Her breath caught, not in fear but in uncertainty. Changed? Only inside. The first engraving remains. I would not erase what you endured. He opened the case and lifted the ring between his fingers, holding it so she could see without offering it too soon. There are new words beneath the old. She took the ring from him. Her hand was steady. Inside the narrow band, beneath the sentence she had once worn alone, another had been engraved in fine script. With honor and with love, if freely chosen. The room blurred for half a second. She blinked once, and the world returned. You added if freely chosen. Yes. Why? Because love that cannot be refused is only another form of pride. Seraphina closed her fingers around the ring. For 4 years, she had thought love would have to arrive as proof, apology, or rescue. Now it stood before her as a man who had learned to wait. That did not undo the lonely dinners, the unanswered letters, the second of doubt. It did not make pain romantic, simply because repentance had followed it. But it made a future possible without requiring her to pretend the past had not happened. She walked to the pianoforte and set the ring on the polished wood. When I opened this room, I thought I was doing it for the house. Adrian stood a few feet away. You were. Perhaps. She touched the edge of the sheet music. But I think I was also making a place for the sound of something honest. Grief, if that was all there could be. Silence, if silence was all anyone would allow. I did not know joy might someday need it. He did not answer quickly. May I hear it? The question was careful. No command, no expectation. Seraphina sat on the bench and rested her fingers on the keys. The first note sounded uncertain, then the second followed with more courage. The melody was simple, almost plain, but the room received it like water after drought. Adrian remained standing until she glanced toward the empty place beside her. Only then did he come closer. He did not sit until she moved slightly, making room. They played no duet. He did not touch the keys. He simply sat beside her while the music filled the room, that had once been locked around old pain. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was unlike any silence they had shared before. It did not accuse, it did not hide, it breathed. Seraphina picked up the ring. Adrian turned toward her, but his hand stayed still. "Seraphina," he said quietly, "you don't have to decide today. No. You don't have to decide because I've brought you here. I know. You don't have to decide because I love you." The words were almost too soft, and because they were not used as pressure, they became bearable. She looked at him then, truly looked, at the controlled man who had learned to confess, the duke who had used rank to correct what rank had helped injure, the husband who had finally understood that to stand beside her, he must first stop standing over her. "I am not returning to the old marriage," she said. "Neither am I. I will not be quiet to make you comfortable. I don't want comfort purchased that way. And if I wear this, it means I choose this day. It doesn't mean you own tomorrow without earning it." His eyes warmed with something deeper than relief. "Then I will earn tomorrow when it comes." Seraphina held out her left hand. Adrian did not move. For one suspended second, the gesture remained hers alone. Then she gave the smallest nod. He took the ring and slid it onto her finger, with a care that made no claim beyond the present. The gold settled into place, familiar and entirely changed. Outside the room, somewhere in the hall, Mrs. Beckett must have heard the music stop, because footsteps approached and then discreetly retreated. The house was learning too. Seraphina looked at the ring, then at the open doors, the mended carpet, the sheet music, the man beside her. Helmsley Park no longer felt like a monument to someone else's sorrow. It felt unfinished in the best sense, a home not yet perfected, but willing to be made honest. She turned back to the keys and began the melody again. This time, Adrian sat beside her without grief. Between them, and the first notes moved through the music room, not for a house still mourning what it had lost, but for a home that had finally learned to see her.